Imagine waking up and discovering that you're a zombie, but not just any zombie. After 1,000 years surviving, fighting, and evolving in a world that tried to destroy him, he has become something far worse than an ordinary monster. Now, the only thing he wants is to live like a normal human. But how do you hide your true nature when your power is strong enough to crush any enemy? If you want to see how this insane story begins, stay with me in this video, because today we're going to look at the beginning of Mr. Zombie. A train was approaching at high speed. The people, unconcerned by the fact that the signal was green, were calmly crossing the train tracks. The train driver realizes he will not be able to stop and shouts for everyone to get out of the way because the train controls have completely shut down. The crew jumps from the train calling for help, and the people who are crossing begin to panic. They start running, but the baby stroller gets stuck on the tracks. The mother, completely panicked, screams for help, but the people, afraid, only tell her to get out of the way. The train keeps heading straight toward her, but a being who was there moves quickly and, with just one hand, manages to stop the train, saving the mother and the baby. The train is completely destroyed, and the mother, with her eyes closed, is only holding her child as tightly as she can. The protagonist extends a hand to her and asks if she is okay. With a trembling voice, the woman thanks him for saving her life, but when she looks at his face, she becomes terrified because she sees an undead being. What is the protagonist's name? It is Zombie. Zom from zombie and B from zombie. His current age is unknown because he has no idea when he died. However, he has a dream, which is to one day become friends with humans, because he has dreamed of that his whole life, or his whole death, however you want to understand it. One day, he hopes to no longer be discriminated against and excluded by them. With that dream in mind, he continues improving himself. Even though that is still very far from happening, he believes that the harder he works, the more successful he will become. Currently, in order to achieve that dream, he has helped countless humans. When a plane full of people was crashing into an arena that was also full of people, he appeared and held the plane with his own hands, saving countless lives. On another occasion, an entire building was on fire and some mothers were screaming because their children were still inside, and once again the protagonist saved all the children. But it was not always like that. Originally, Zombie was not that strong. He remembers that on a summer day, a zombie outbreak caused an apocalypse. When that happened, he was studying at school at the time, and because the outbreak happened so suddenly, he did not escape in time and was bitten, turning into an ordinary zombie. And by ordinary zombie, he really meant a completely ordinary zombie, the kind we see as a mob, following orders no matter where they go. Until one day, humans started to appear. Without saying why, they simply pointed a bunch of weapons and missiles at the zombies, eliminating countless of them all at once. Humans not only eliminated them, but also created a perpetual energy machine in order to examine them. Because of that, the undead became a source of electrical energy. However, the protagonist was still a little lost, because he did not know why zombies wanted to eat humans or why humans wanted to eliminate zombies. But to survive, he decided to change that himself. With his plan in mind, he began training from that day onward, lifting weights, running, swimming, and jumping everywhere day after day. An independent life began through his own effort, avoiding meat so he would not feel the urge to attack humans, consuming only 3 meals a day of protein powder. And even though he felt exhausted from doing that over and over again, he kept training even through the night, until one day he became like Ramon Dino and turned invincible. After gaining both strength and knowledge, he decided to live in a society created by humans. He continuously helped change their perceptions about zombies because he wants to live as a citizen, obeying the law and being a good zombie. Feeling a little hungry, he goes to the fridge and realizes all the food is already gone and now he needs to buy more. A short while later, inside a convenience store, the clerk greets the protagonist and asks if he is there to buy more supplies. She also asks whether it is not uncomfortable for him to wear that mask every day. Zombie tries to explain that it is not a mask. After buying his things, people quickly load up his truck. A man, together with his assistant, was trying to photograph the protagonist. The cameraman asks his boss whether that is the man he had been looking for. His boss says yes, because today he will definitely remove the mask and see who is behind it. As soon as the people finish loading the truck, they greet the protagonist and say goodbye. Zombie looks at the wanted poster and sees that Agu is being wanted again. Agu is an SS-level chief. The cameraman asks his superior again whether he is sure that is the superhuman who managed to hold an entire plane with his bare hands, because maybe that is just false information spread by the media. The boss says that may be true and that all that talk must be the media trying to hype things up again, and that is why they are going to remove that mask and expose the person behind it. While they were talking about it, the two become completely terrified and even the camera seems to widen its eyes. Like a good truck driver, the protagonist lifts the truck with his own hands and jumps, simply disappearing into the sky. The two stand there asking what just happened, but the protagonist jumped so high that he was already reaching the space station. In a completely isolated and protected area, several zombies were inside. A small zombie was tugging at his mother, saying he was very hungry. Having no idea what to do, She asks him to endure just a little longer. The protagonist was approaching that place, jumping kilometers at a time, until he finally arrived, and all the other zombies shouted that the king had just returned. Two children approach and ask him why he did not drive the truck like humans do. Zombie explains that he did not do that because he does not have a driver's license. That place is the city the protagonist managed to conquer, far from the curious eyes of humans. Because of that, he ordered all the zombies there to use eggs to replace the proteins they used to get from eating fresh human meat. Zombie asks where Agu and the rest are. The little one says they are in the corridor of the main hotel. Lang, Fur, Agon, Agu, Vermint, and Blackie are all chief-level zombies, with an SSS danger level. As soon as the protagonist opens the door, all of them line up to salute His Majesty. Zombie hands the wanted paper to Agu and points out that he is being wanted by humans again. Agu apologizes and explains that whenever he sees a human, his body just loses control. The protagonist falls silent and sits down. Blackie tells the protagonist that although they are steadily increasing their numbers to hide from humans, they have already changed military bases multiple times. Vermin asks for permission to go to the humans and fight them, because his chainsaw is already starting to rust from not tasting fresh blood for so long. Zombie tries to calm the situation, asking what they know about that because humans are scary. Suddenly, they start hearing a very loud noise. An aircraft was approaching and a woman was ready for combat. She was analyzing the radars. Her crew tells her all signals are normal and ready, and that all the equipment is also prepared. She asks about the payload. That payload is an armed nuclear warhead set to detonate in 20 minutes. The protagonist notices the noises are getting closer and closer. The president of the organization says that is very good and that now those disgusting zombies need to experience this new weapon. Vermint realizes that noise is from the humans and asks for permission again to go there and confront them, but the protagonist only asks him to stay there, explaining that he might lose control the moment he gets near humans. Therefore, they need to evacuate all the residents, while the protagonist himself will deal with the humans. The woman keeps coordinating the attack and asks whether the ground unit understood the plan. She stresses once again that they have 20 minutes to save the citizens and evacuate. In addition, she asks Marshall to remain on standby and prepare to intercept if a chief zombie appears. Marshall says he understands and tells his president to leave everything to him, because if a zombie appears, he will act and cut it down immediately. The zombie horde starts to approach. Faye was far away and watching the panels. A green-haired young man informs him that the people from the Extraordinary Academy found the zombies. Faye says that is good and gives the order for them to start playing too. A group of humans is thrown into the middle of the zombies inside a cage. The humans become terrified, screaming to be saved because they do not want to die. As soon as those humans are dropped there, the order is sent to the ground team, telling them to move in immediately because they have just detected human life. A small group of soldiers starts firing, but a girl becomes horrified, asking why that zombie is not dying. The protagonist was protecting the two children from the earth bullets. Another man grabs a rocket launcher, saying there is no zombie that cannot be killed, because if that is happening, it is only due to a lack of firepower. He fires the missile, causing a small explosion. Another soldier goes to his chief, saying that person is not a zombie. He's known as an extraordinary one, the person who has always been helping humans before. He's famous for always wearing a zombie mask. The captain realizes they have just shot the wrong person, but as soon as the smoke from the explosion begins to dissipate, the protagonist appears completely unharmed. The president of the organization informs Marshall that a chief zombie has been detected in Zone B. As soon as he receives the information, he tells her to leave it to him and leaps toward the indicated direction. Faye continues analyzing and says that the ground unit managed to save almost all the civilians. The green-haired young man laughs, saying maybe they underestimated their way of acting. Faye says that if that is the case, they need to try something a little more interesting. The young man laughs and says he already understands. The zombies who were running suddenly start to feel something, and one of them transforms into a huge beast. The protagonist is a little surprised because he was not expecting that. Marshall kept approaching, and the alert is sent to all units saying that a chief zombie appeared in Zone B. The red-haired girl says she understands and says they will head there immediately, but when she looks back, she sees the squad leader running desperately. He jumps and grabs the protagonist, saying that saving a life is more important. As soon as he grabs the protagonist, he runs away and throws him inside the truck, telling the pilot to move already and asking what he is waiting for. The girl looks at the protagonist and asks if he is that person with a zombie mask who has always helped everyone, because she is curious to know why he always wears that mask. Zombie does not know how to respond in that situation. Meanwhile, outside, the ground troops ask what that thing was doing. The zombie who had transformed throws a bus toward them, but the bus is cut in half by Marshall. The ground troops celebrate because with him there, they will definitely win. Marshall tells the troops to take all the civilians and retreat because he will handle the rest. The ground unit quickly starts organizing the civilians to get them out of there. The squad chief asks one of the soldiers what is happening up ahead. The soldier explains that a chief zombie appeared, but Marshall managed to intercept it and is taking care of it. The protagonist realizes that is Little Nine's voice. The red-haired girl notices the protagonist had become a little too quiet and tells him not to worry because the ground squad was there to help, but when she looks back she realizes he is no longer there. Marshall, who was watching the transformed zombie, asks whether that did not hurt, but the zombie simply charges to attack him. Marshall reacts quickly, saying that if that is the case, then he will help put an end to that pain. In a matter of seconds, he lands several slashes on the zombie, finishing it off without difficulty. Looking back, he tells the zombie that now it can rest in peace, but notices another person was there and asks whether it is a zombie. Zombie was only watching, saying nothing. The crew in the command center informs the president of the organization that they have just received a message from Marshall saying the chief zombie was defeated. She is happy and says he did a great job, asking the crew to register it as one of his contribution credits. The protagonist, who was still looking at one of his own kind, says that was not its fault and apologizes, saying they cannot control themselves. As soon as Marshall realizes the protagonist said they, he advances quickly, saying all zombies must die. The girl tells the president to wait because they have just detected another chief-level zombie and asks why there is another one. But in less than a minute, the expression on her face changes and she says that unfortunately Marshall is already gone. The president is shocked and asks what she just said. Marshall was completely defeated and the protagonist did not have a single scratch on his body. The girl points out that Marshall's vital signs are already completely gone because he suffered critical damage. In addition, they still have not evacuated all the civilians. The president, feeling enormous pain from losing one of her best soldiers, loses control and quickly moves toward where her soldier was last seen. The crew panics, telling the president she's being too reckless because she should not go alone into places like that. However, she says she needs to see for herself how strong that thing is. Zombie notices she was approaching but does nothing. As soon as the president lands her sword strike, it breaks completely. She is startled, asking what that bastard is made of. Frightened, she retreats, and her crew keeps trying to get her to fall back, telling her she cannot act without warning them, because if she continues like that, they will not be able to send support to her. The girl asks if she is okay, and the president says yes. Zombie, who does not want to fight humans without a clear reason, tries to apologize, saying he has already done this once. The president is surprised to see that he can talk and says that apparently he must be some kind of mutant or variant, and if that is the case, she needs to deal with him in another way. She picks up the sword and prepares for another attack. The protagonist tries to stop her, asking her to listen to him for at least a little while, but she charges again, saying he can talk to Yama after she is done. She tries to attack him, but the protagonist moves too fast, dodging the blows with ease. Even so, she insists on continuing the fight and unleashes an extremely powerful slash, cutting through almost everything around her. However, once again, the protagonist dodges it. The president becomes even more irritated when she sees that mutation is playing with her. The ground troops manage to rescue Marshall, who even with his vital signs practically non-existent, was still alive. The crew informs the president that all civilians have already been evacuated, so she can return now. However, they receive no response. Both she and the protagonist were moving at a surprising speed, but the truth was that the protagonist was only playing around with the situation because he did not want to fight the human race. On the other hand, the president was giving it everything she had, asking why he was only running. Zombie asks whether she will stop trying to cut him if he stops running away. Seeing that she could not match his speed, she stops and reactivates Iaido level 2. Her suit begins to open, creating extremely powerful propulsion and drastically increasing her speed. As soon as she catches up to him, she delivers the strike, hitting the protagonist and knocking him down. She sheathes the sword, saying the target has been eliminated. She informs the crew that the mission is complete and tells them to bring the plane down to rescue her. The green-haired young man tells Faye that they managed to rescue all the civilians. Faye says they still have a spy, so they just need to use him. The population was shouting that they were finally safe, but suddenly one of the commanders notices strange movement in his companion. The man presses the red button and launches the nuclear warhead, while the whole crew was celebrating, saying they would finally be able to return home. The captain and another crew member shout for them to stop celebrating because there was an enemy spy among them and the bomb had been launched. Completely terrified, they try to contact the president, asking if she can hear them and explaining the situation, saying that an enemy spy infiltrated them and released the nuclear warhead. So she is in danger and needs to get out of there immediately. The bomb was heading exactly toward her. The crew girl makes an announcement telling everyone to prepare for turbulence because they are opening the cabin doors and lowering the altitude to pick up the president. In addition, she tells the president that she needs to jump or they will not be able to escape the explosion. She tries to jump but realizes it is not working. One of the pilots asks whether the president has still not returned on board because they are running out of time. She realizes the leg thrusters are no longer working because she used up all the battery earlier to face the mutation. While trying to fix the thrusters, she notices something approaching, and when she looks to the side, she sees the protagonist was intact. He grabs her by the shirt and throws her very high, sending her back to the plane. As soon as the crew catches her, they ask if she is okay and order the doors shut immediately so they can escape. However, she realizes what had happened and shouts for them to grab that mutant. The nuclear warhead was approaching and the protagonist only watched it. Gathering all his strength, he stomps the ground with incredible force and launches himself upward. He braces himself and creates a skill called barehanded nuclear warhead catch. All the people watching that cannot believe it. A massive explosion happens, destroying basically everything within its reach. The president asks what just happened, but as soon as things calm down, she cannot believe what she is seeing. The Saitama of the afterlife was basically intact, with only a slight itch on his butt. Faye tells the green-haired young man that it is time to leave, but the young man warns that there is still a life signal in the blast area. Faye points out that this is not the first time they have fought against the Academy of the Afterlife, and it will not be the last. In addition, he promises they will get them next time. Inside the helicopter, the president was feeling a little uncomfortable. The crew asks what her problem is. Another person asks the crew to think about it a little, because the president spent all her time fighting zombies only to, in the end, be saved by one of them. The girl approaches the president and says that apparently there was a misunderstanding, and shows an image saying that guy is not a zombie. She explains that he is the masked hero who became famous some time ago. They themselves confirmed that he has lived in the city for a while and just likes to hide his identity with a mask. The president is stunned to discover that. Meanwhile, the protagonist was walking through the city and scaring everyone when he answered a phone. Vermont tells the boss not to worry about them because many are safe and they are looking for a new place to stay. Zombie is relieved, saying that is very good, and promises to go find them as soon as they manage to locate a new place to stay. In the phone booth, some cameras from the city itself were pointed at the protagonist. As soon as he finished communicating, he hung up and went home. And again, another camera was pointed at him. The girl tells the president that they managed to find the protagonist's whereabouts, but he looks at the camera as if he can see them. However, he decides to ignore it and goes into his house to train a little. While training, he looks at a photograph and smiles, wondering whether his family has already managed to find a place to settle again because he wants to visit them. Suddenly, the president gently opens the door and orders her team to take everything from the kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. The protagonist is startled and asks who they are and what they think they are doing, because if they keep acting like that, he will call the police. The president shows him a document and says they are from the Academy of the Afterlife and are there to inform the protagonist that he has been accepted into the Academy. So from that moment on, he is a member of the Academy. The agents go to him to restrain him, but he tries to resist, yet because he does not want to hurt humans, he gives in and asks whether zombies can go to school. However, they tell him to stop pretending because they already know he is a human. Outside, the red-haired young woman asks the president whether that is not a little inappropriate because the Academy has strict criteria for recruits, and asks whether it is really okay to simply add the protagonist to the list on her own authority because, on top of that, the Academy dorms are specially planned, and if they really take the protagonist there, he will have nowhere to stay. The president says it is fine because if there is nowhere for him to stay, she will share a room with him. Sometime later, already inside her apartment, the agents were carrying his things inside, and in a short time they finished and said goodbye to the two of them. The protagonist keeps staring at her without knowing what to say and asks whether he will stay there in the future. She asks if that is not already obvious enough and why he is asking and whether it is because he wants to sleep with her. The protagonist becomes a little embarrassed and tries to explain, saying that was not what he meant. In his mind, a zombie sleeping with a human woman is something absurd to imagine. The president explains that the protagonist will sleep in the guest room. Zombie tries to explain the situation, saying she must have misunderstood something because he is not a human. However, she simply ignores him and starts removing the thrusters from her leg. As soon as she removes them, the protagonist is shocked and shouts, asking what happened to her leg. The president explains that she herself tore it off and asks whether there is any problem. He says no. She explains that a zombie disaster happened in her village when she was a child. Because of that, her parents turned into zombies and bit her leg. In order to survive, she amputated her own leg and eliminated the parents who had become zombies. Because of that, hatred took over her heart and the desire for revenge flooded her mind. So she made a promise to eliminate every zombie she finds in her life. Hearing that, the protagonist is a little shocked, and the president keeps asking what he was talking about earlier. Zombie dodges the situation and explains that he was not going to say anything, then changes the subject by asking if she can explain a little better what this Academy of the Afterlife really is. The president explains that it is an organization specialized in developing ways to fight zombies, because it has been 1,000 years since the first zombie disaster occurred. In order to survive the zombie disasters, the ancestors created an academy 200 years after the first disaster. The sole purpose of the academy is to fight zombies. Over the years, countless talents were cultivated to help fight zombie disasters. The protagonist becomes a little confused, asking whether that really was established 200 years after the first zombie disaster. Because even though his memory is a little messy, he remembers becoming a zombie at the beginning of the first disaster, which means he has already been alive for more than 1,000 years. The president tells him not to forget to report to the academy tomorrow morning because she already enlisted him through an external channel. He wonders whether he really cannot simply not show up, but the president stresses that he should not even think about running away, since the academy is not just any organization. So if he does not show up, they will investigate the reasons for his attempted escape. She introduces herself, saying her name is Violet, and points out that Dawn will pick him up tomorrow to take him to the academy. In addition, she is sure the two of them already know each other. Zombie is confused, asking how she knows that the two know each other, because he himself does not know someone named Dawn. The next day, Dawn was already waiting. With a smile on her face and a friendly manner, she calls him masked little brother and asks if he is doing okay. But the protagonist is confused and asks who she is. Dawn gets irritated, asking if he really already forgot that the two of them were together in the armored transport. Zombie is surprised and says he remembers, but that she was a little smaller then. She tries to stay calm, since it would be better for her not to start an argument with her future schoolmate, because he is nothing but an idiot. Irritated, she simply says they need to go quickly because it is already time for the admission exam. Zombie, still understanding absolutely nothing about what was happening, goes to her and asks whether he really needs to take an admission exam. She says yes and asks what kind of school does not have tests, then explains that this test is to evaluate both the physical skills and the special abilities he possesses to eliminate zombies. She gives an example and says that the world record for the 100-meter dash is 9.58 seconds, which means he would have to run at least 9.57 seconds to be classified. The protagonist says he understands and comments that apparently that is the level of the Academy of the Afterlife. Dawn asks what he thought it would be. The protagonist explains that he had imagined it would be an asylum and that everyone there would be crazy. Sometime later, in the middle of the field, a welcome sign was hanging and countless other candidates were there to take the test. Dawn tries to see, but since they were farther back, she complains that she cannot see anything from there. A man who was in front, irritated, tells her to be quiet because trash like her should stay in the back. But she does not take that and asks what his problem is. Zombie still cannot understand why he should take that stupid exam and asks her to explain how someone who lifted a plane in a human city needs to take a test. Dawn explains that even so, he still needs to take the exam because at that school there are many people who lift planes. Since that school was founded by the old government, everyone there is kept secret. Suddenly, someone starts approaching and asks everyone to remain seated. The old man goes to the microphone and greets everyone, saying he will be in charge of the exam. He introduces himself as President Chen, head of the sports department. He points out that it has already been 800 years since that school was established. During all that time, countless talents joined and left. Previously, the ancestors who fought against the zombie kings could cut entire mountains in half. But the point there is that they do not need to cut mountains. They only need to... Suddenly, someone interrupts him. Zombie starts smiling, saying he has a question. He asks what happens if a zombie is found inside the academy. President Chen says that is very simple. They will cut it apart limb by limb and then hang the rest of the undead on the academy gate so everyone can see. And finally, the zombies will be castrated. Upon hearing that he would be castrated, Zombie gets a bit more worried. Until then, losing an arm or leg was fine, but the family jewels are another matter. The protagonist asks whether they really were referring to castration, and the president says yes, that they would rip off that little thing hanging there. Sometime later, the exam begins, and the first test is the 100-meter dash. As soon as the start is given, one contestant runs with impressive speed. He is Wu Chengsu, and he ran it in 3 seconds. Even Zombie was impressed. The next test was target shooting. The president points out that shooting is the most basic skill for fighting zombies. If they can do that well, then they will ruin a zombie's life. But if they do it very badly, then the zombie is the one who will ruin theirs. In this way, the protagonist was dragged to that strange place and forced to learn how to fight zombies, in addition to learning daily theoretical knowledge about zombies. There are also training exercises. Dawn had mastered the art of shooting very well and with ease managed to hit the vital points of her targets. The protagonist watched how humans treated their own kind and thought that was not normal. The president says the next test is throwing. They need to reach 80 meters to pass and 100 meters to qualify. Thus, the protagonist was trapped there with that group of crazy people. In order not to draw attention, he was extremely careful to control his strength as much as possible. Chen, who was analyzing the protagonist's file, sees that his name is Zombie. His height is 182 centimeters and his weight is 72 kilograms. In addition, he only achieved the minimum score necessary to pass all the tests. But President Violet had warned that this person is very strong and specifically asked the president to give him special attention. He becomes confused because the president had said with her own words that that boy was very strong and the only explanation he found was that the young man was deliberately pretending to be weak. With that, the exams continued. Changshu threw his spear, hitting a rather strange area, making Zombie feel the dummy's pain. But his strength was so great that the spear pierced through 3 dummies, broke through the protective fence, and hit a sign in the middle of the city. Chen says that the spear reached 32 kilometers, and because of that, Chengsu is qualified, and he says the protagonist is next. Chengsu looks at Zombie in a strange way. The protagonist picks up his spear and gets ready to throw, but the president shouts for him to wait. Chen walks over to the protagonist and asks if his name is Zombie, because if so, then he is the person brought in by the president of the swordsman department herself. In addition, she had said that the protagonist is very strong. However, based on the previous results, the protagonist had only managed scores at the passing level, so the only explanation is that he is deliberately hiding his true strength. In addition, the protagonist is also the same person who asked that question earlier. The president points out that all the people there are trying their best to qualify and none of them would dare hold back. Chen moves even closer, asking if Zombie really is a person. The protagonist gets scared and says there is no chance that is true, and assumes that yes, he is indeed a human. The president says that if that is the case, then it is better for the protagonist to show his full power for real. In addition, he points out that he will not ask the protagonist to reach 32 kilometers like the previous student. As long as he manages to reach 1/10 of that, he will qualify. Because if he cannot do that, then it will be clear that he is using some kind of trick to fool President Violet, and if that is the case, he will have no choice but to treat him as a spy and punish him immediately. The protagonist begins reflecting on all of that, and even though he does not remember many things from his past, all the people who chased him when he became a zombie came from that place, and he does not want to become fuel for that organization or an endless source of power generation. So he decided to just throw it as far as he possibly could. The president asked him to think very carefully about everything he has been through and everything he has been living for all this time. Zombie gets ready to throw and remembers all his training through all those years. The force released was so great that the ground around him begins to crack. The pressure in the area changes drastically and the spear is thrown with such force that it leaves the planet, passes through the space station, and hits the moon. The other competitors are thrown backward just from the pressure of the movement. Everyone there, including the president, is shocked by that. The spear pierces through the moon completely, causing an enormous crater there. The people who had been thrown backward begin to hit the ground, and the protagonist realizes what he had just done. Everyone there is completely shocked by the strength he showed. Dawn, excited, runs up to him asking if he saw the examiner's face and emphasizes that the protagonist really is very strong. She asks how far he managed to throw that thing, but he says he does not know exactly because he only tried his best, just as he had said he would. But as we already know, I think it went a little too far. After receiving his approval certificate, he asks if he can go back home. Dawn is surprised and asks why he would do that because with all the strength he showed, he could become a president. She asks whether he has any idea how much authority a department president has, but the protagonist is a little confused since he does not understand the hierarchy she is trying to explain. To explain the situation, she asks him to think about the president of the swordsman department, Violet. Not only can she command an army of troops, tanks, aircraft, and long-range cannons, but she also has access to nuclear weapons. On top of that, she holds the highest authority in a city of 30 million people. The president is merely someone who helps her manage the city. She is still the one who gives the final verdict, regardless of the choice of the army, the president, or anyone else. However, the protagonist was not sure whether that was really a good thing because he already has his own city. Sometime later, they go to another place, and he asks what kind of place that is. Dawn explains that it is the biotechnology department, the place where all weapons are made. He can also call it the logistics department. He looks to the side and sees a photograph. She explains that the man there is Professor Jamie. Everyone calls him the head of logistics. He used to be the former president of the biotechnology department. However, ever since his wife passed away, he became obsessed with a crazy experiment involving both sides, humans and zombies alike. Rumors say his goal was to fulfill his wife's final wish. However, he was expelled from the academy for going too far. The academy even has an order to eliminate him if he is found. Suddenly, a woman approaches and greets the two, asking if they have a new student, and also asking whether Dawn managed to pass the exam. Dawn says yes, and Zombie asks who that woman is. Dawn explains that she is Professor Jamie's adopted daughter and the current president of the biotechnology department. The woman asks Dawn to go over to the table and asks what kind of equipment she needs. Dawn says she wants something that will let her carry weapons more easily, like a pair of pants where she can hide her Gatling gun. The department chief says that by the looks of it, Dawn is going to end up joining the weapons department. She asks the protagonist what he prefers. Zombie steps closer and asks if she is talking to him, but as soon as she looks at his face, she panics, screaming that there is a zombie there. Dawn explains to her that the protagonist is not a zombie, he just likes to wear that zombie mask for some reason. Chin grabs Dawn, asking whether she thinks she's an idiot or if her eyes are growing somewhere else. Since it is obvious that the protagonist is a zombie, Dawn insists and explains that she is not lying because she saw the protagonist's face when he was doing the spear throw a little earlier, and he is super cool. Chin asks whether she is serious, but she ends up agreeing, since if the protagonist were a zombie, she would have already been attacked. With everything cleared up, she asks again what requirements Zombie wants for his equipment. He says he does not have anything in mind because whenever he goes outside, he ends up coming back home without clothes. So perhaps the most appropriate thing would simply be a set of clothes that cannot be torn. She thinks about it for a moment and says she understands. By the looks of it, Dawn wants to store more weapons, and the protagonist simply does not want to end up without clothes after a battle. Meanwhile, Marshall was reporting the situation with a trembling voice. He emphasizes that the protagonist is super strong because when he managed to get close, his vision went dark and 1 second later he was already hanging from a lamppost. The woman asks whether his president would win in a fight against that being. Marshall points out that he feels the last opponent he fought is extremely stronger than his president. The woman stands up and looks at him, asking him to say the name but gets no answer. She says that is fine and asks her guards to let Marshall go. She is Zhang Langqi, president of the sword department. The competition between the sword department and the blade department has been passed down through generations. Both sides used ruthless means to take people from one another. The rivalry became so intense that if the other side had one extra member, the other could even give birth to an extra member on its own just to avoid becoming weaker than the opponent. Marshall notices Langqi's obsession and wishes the zombie lord good luck. Inside a classroom, a teacher was explaining how to capture an undead. Besides eating human flesh, there are those who also love eating eggs. So they must learn to use the tastes and weaknesses of zombies to their advantage. With that in mind, they can spread traps. While the teacher was speaking, the protagonist was completely focused on everything. Dawn is surprised and asks what he is doing. The protagonist says he is taking notes because he needs to share that with his family. She becomes even more confused because she does not know who his family is. Suddenly, an announcement is made telling everyone to pay attention and head to the gym immediately. Dawn finds that strange because they had only had one assembly. A short while later in the gym, the students were gathered and she asks again what is going on there. Violet tells her to stay quiet and points out that the two of them were recommended by her, so they should not cause any trouble. Dawn looks at Zombie, who asks how he manages to eat even while wearing the mask. The man accompanying Langqi looks at the protagonist and tells his president that it is that boy. Although he seems a little slow, it is basically impossible to measure his strength just by looking. The man asks whether he should go over there and test him, and the president says yes. Suddenly, another person enters the gym. As soon as he enters, everyone bows respectfully except for the protagonist. Dawn scolds him, telling him to lower his head, because that is the president of the Mechanical Lifeforms Department. The man walks past Langqi and asks what she is doing, telling her not to cause any trouble and calling her an idiot. She says he can help himself as much as he wants because she's already leaving. Her subordinate is a little confused, saying that zombies should be kept under surveillance. She says that compared to the zombie chief, there are more important things, and that she only respects sword cuts. The chief walks over to Violet and says she worked very hard, but she says she was only doing her job. The protagonist, who was watching that, notices that the atmosphere between them is a little strange and asks whether something is happening between the two of them. Dawn changes the subject and asks whether he likes jelly, but he replies that he does not because he prefers eggs. On top of that, he asks whether the chief is really that powerful. She asks if he remembers Professor Jamie, because the chief is the professor's masterpiece, an evolved version of humans. He was the only one to survive among the thousands of experimental tests carried out by the professor. After the professor was expelled, he created the Mechanical Lifeforms Department. The city under the control of his department has around 50 million people. During the 10 years of his presidency, not a single zombie has appeared in the city he controls. That is because if he finds even a single zombie hair, he will exterminate the entire area until it is completely sanitized. The chief walks up to the stage and says he will be brief, emphasizing that everyone there is a freshman and lives different lifestyles. The academy needs their help right away. He asks one of his robots to start the projection. The image of a man appears and the chief explains that he is the spy they captured a few months ago. Thanks to that spy, they launched a nuclear warhead at their own people. The protagonist realizes that it was that man who launched the bomb at him. The chief continues explaining and says that although someone like that guy would normally be eliminated immediately, they received reliable information that the man is a close subordinate of the traitor, Professor Jamie. The protagonist realizes that if there is a traitor, then the zombies are not the original target. He asks Dawn if that is why the zombie threat has long since passed and all these conflicts are because of internal fighting. She says yes, because some people just want to see the world burn. The professor keeps talking and points out that they have countless methods to make that traitor speak, but nothing is working. All the seniors have already tried and failed, which means none of the methods they used managed to make him talk. That is why they are there asking everyone to help the academy. Whoever manages to make that man talk and reveal where the professor is will receive an immediate reward and become vice president. All the students get excited because they had only entered recently and had now already received the chance to become vice presidents. Everyone raises their hands saying they would like to participate. The chief explains that the traitor is being held in a chamber in the back and wishes good luck to everyone who wants to try. 2 hours later, after countless failed attempts, the freshmen were beginning to despair. At first, the methods were more normal, but they gradually became far less orthodox. Violet had already lost hope. Dawn asks whether the protagonist can make him talk. Zombie says that if he wants to, he can make the traitor even sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. She gets excited and tells the chief that her friend says he has a way. The chief says that all help is welcome and asks him to come closer. The protagonist begins walking over, and Lanki becomes confused because she thought he liked to stay off the radar, so why is he doing something now? Zombie thinks that his subordinates had always been very obedient, but for some reason over the last few weeks they had randomly been losing control, and maybe this human could explain something. He is taken to the traitor's room and immediately the man already looks down on him, saying that he would just be one more. As soon as the protagonist gets closer, the two stare at each other, and the traitor asks whether the academy ran out of people, because he does not see any point in sending someone like the protagonist there, and tells him to give up, because he will not betray Brother Faye. But with a simple movement, the protagonist makes a small cut on the man's arm, and the man starts laughing, asking if that is the best he can do. Because if he is trying to make him talk, then he needs to use a little more strength. He says that he was not afraid, even when his private parts were damaged. So what use would just a small cut be, since that is no different from an insect bite? Zombie orders him to stand up. The traitor stays silent and stands. The president, the chief, and Dawn are impressed. In truth, that small cut was enough for the protagonist to put something inside that man's body, and it was carried directly to the brain through the bloodstream. Zombie asks the man to say his name. The traitor says that his name is Zhao Kai. Dawn is so impressed that she asks the president whether the protagonist can really control other people's minds. Zombie continues his work and says that he heard Zhao Kai is a close subordinate of Professor Jamie, so he must know a lot. Zhao Kai says yes and agrees that he really does have a lot of information. The protagonist asks whether he knows why the zombies are randomly becoming uncontrollable. Zhao Kai explains that this is happening because they released a medicine created by Faye in the city. The zombies who consume the medicine go crazy, and because of that, they can be controlled from a distance. They use this method to order the controlled zombies to attack humans. And through the battles between humans and the zombies they control, they are able to collect data from the Academy of the Afterlife. Zombie asks why they are doing that. Zhao Kai says he does not know and emphasizes that Faye only said he was doing something great, and the order was to collect data from the members of the Academy of the Afterlife by controlling zombie attacks. The protagonist asks where the professor is now. Zhao Kai explains that the professor is in a secret base 500 meters below City H. After receiving the information he needed, the protagonist orders him to turn around and starts leaving the room. Using zombie language, he says that Zhao Kai's people are truly hateful. On top of that, he put a virus into his brain, and if he wants to, he can force him to lose his own life. He tells Zhao Kai to take care of himself, and Zhao Kai simply replies that he understands. 500 meters beneath the ruins of City H, the young man tells Faye that he has just received the information that the spy confessed, so the Academy must know their location by now. Faye says that it is fine, and asks the young man to simply keep doing what they supposedly ought to be doing, because in truth it is better if the Academy is looking for him. The young man is confused, saying that if that happens, Faye will be in danger, because those people are not so easy to deal with. The professor says that it is fine because the experiment has already been completed, and now it would be perfect for the Academy to enter there, because he would very much like everyone to witness that historic moment, the birth of a new, complete life form. After the interrogation, the protagonist returns and everyone is shocked, commenting on what he just did. The chief gets everyone's attention and starts applauding, saying that the young really will surpass them. And even though he did not expect someone with that kind of power to be hiding among the freshmen, it is good to know that such a person exists. And since he had made the promise that whoever succeeded in getting the confession would become vice president, he is going to fulfill that now. The chief asks the protagonist to come with him because they're going to do that right now. The protagonist tries to say that the professor is, but the chief asks him not to worry because the professor is not going to run away. Lanki keeps watching suspiciously, and her subordinate says that this is very strange because he does not remember there being any registration process to become vice president. She says they need to follow them. In the abandoned industrial area, the protagonist thinks that is a little suspicious, and asks where they are because he thought they were going to do the registration and then go after the professor. The chief asks the protagonist when he learned to speak human language. Zombie is confused and asks whether that question is for him. The chief turns and says yes, then attacks him. Lanki, who was following them, was nearly struck by the attack, but her subordinate saves her. He asks whether his president is alright. She says yes and explains that it was the chief's tachyon cannon, because he has the ability to disintegrate any matter. The chief emphasizes that the protagonist may have fooled the others, but he cannot fool him. On top of that, he would very much like to know what the Academy idiots are doing to let a zombie like that enter. But that does not matter now because the weakness of all zombies is the head. When a zombie loses its head, it loses all ability to move. He apologizes for doing that, but the protagonist stepped into a place where he should not have stepped. However, in the blink of an eye, Zombie rushes at the chief, grabbing his neck. The chief's robots try to attack the protagonist, causing an explosion that is enough to let the chief escape. He stares at the smoke and asks how that is possible, how the protagonist can still move, and on top of that, eliminate all the robots with extreme ease. Lanki and her subordinate cannot believe what they are seeing. The protagonist attacks again, but the chief manages to dodge and tries to counterattack. However, the protagonist's movements continue to be as fast as lightning. They exchange a few blows and the chief pulls back. The president's subordinate says that the chief is in trouble, but she says no, that he is only beginning to get serious because men like him like to show off with big, flashy movements. That is why they need to move a little farther away before they get caught in the area of effect. But suddenly the protagonist's head regenerates completely, leaving both the president and her subordinate in disbelief. Zombie tells the chief that he does not want to hurt him and asks whether they can talk. But the chief notices a small scratch on his neck and says that the protagonist probably wants to control his mind too. But that is unfortunate. He summons Model 1 and several robots approach and merge, transforming into a super robot with the chief inside. He charges, saying that he will never speak with zombies and emphasizes that the protagonist is the first zombie ever to see that form, so he ought to feel honored. He lands a blow and throws the protagonist backward, then quickly chases after him, landing another blow and launching him upward. The attack continues, and several strikes are delivered simultaneously. The chief screams that all zombies must die, and with his final attack, he unleashes an overwhelming amount of energy, pulverizing everything in front of him, and emphasizes that after that, nothing and no one would survive. But Zombie simply comes walking back. The chief cannot believe that is possible. Irritated by the situation, the protagonist lets out a terrifying roar, changing the atmosphere of the place. His face, his body, and even his hair all appear completely. The chief asks what the protagonist really is. The amount of force released creates a vortex in the sky that covers the entire city. Dawn screams that something is wrong in the sky. Lanki realizes that it does not look good at all. The population also notices that the sky is growing dark and asks what is happening there. Zombie calls the chief a mediocre little human and points out that he already gave many chances to resolve everything peacefully through conversation. But since all of those chances were thrown away, now he only wants to know one thing. How would the superhuman, the evolved life form they keep talking so much about, like to die? Lanki screams that she's getting a threatening feeling and that the protagonist's personality has turned around 180 degrees. Frightened by that situation, the two of them run away. The chief mocks the situation, saying that ever since he was born, he has never felt threatened by another being. So he would like to know who the protagonist thinks he is to speak to him like that. Confident, he calls Zombie to battle because he does not believe he can be defeated. Lanki and her subordinate continue running desperately. The subordinate warns that he checked the Academy database, but there is no record of a zombie like that. She says she has never seen anything like it either. He asks what they should do because since they are already a reasonably long distance away, perhaps they are safe. But suddenly something passes by them at terrifying speed. The two manage to dodge, but realize that the danger level is very high because they are fighting in the city's new district. However, what passed by them was only what remained of the chief. The protagonist walks over to him and looks at that pathetic life form. The chief, completely desperate, calls for models 2, 3, and 4, but all of them are destroyed with ease. The explosion throws the three of them back, and the chief says to her that that zombie is very dangerous, so he needs help. Lanki asks whether he has gone crazy and questions why he provoked that to begin with. Since there was not the slightest chance they could defeat such terrifying and absolute power, their only choice was to split up and run. However, the chief had already gone too far. He had enraged someone who should never have been enraged. Zombie channels his strength into his hand, and the president asks what he is planning. Zombie drives his hand into the ground, and the entire city begins to tremble. Suddenly, Lanki realizes that the ground is very close to her, and when she looks back, she sees something that makes no sense at all. The entire city was being lifted by the protagonist. The people around ask what is happening, and Dawn screams that the city's new district is floating in the sky. Zombie had lifted the new city completely. He dashes after his prey and starts dragging the chief across the ground, asking whether he can now understand the feeling of being threatened. On top of that, he points out that the chief had always been right. He cannot control the mind of a robot, but because he is partly human, he must have a human brain as well. Zombie sends his virus into the chief's mind to see his memories and realizes that he was an orphan from an early age, subjected to body modifications until he barely had any human parts left. That shows that he had a miserable life and is more undead than a zombie. For him, staying alive is more painful than dying, and knowing that ruined the pleasure Zombie was feeling. He simply lets go of the chief, who is saved by Lanki, but she cannot believe that the man can even read people's memories. The protagonist simply disappears and runs to his room to grab his things. He had already returned to his normal form, but he was a little upset because he had lost control of his emotions again, and taking that form is a little frightening to him. But he only needs to remember that he is a good and friendly zombie. As soon as he retrieves his things, he closes the door and runs off, saying goodbye to the humans. But in the middle of the way, Violet asks where he was going. He's a little upset because he did not want to silence a witness. He turns to attack her, but decides to stop the attack. She shows him documents proving that the protagonist has now been promoted to the position of vice president. So from that point on, he is officially the vice president of the Academy of the Afterlife. He asks whether that really is the chief's signature, and she says yes. The protagonist, still confused, asks whether the chief did not say anything, and she explains that the chief had said the protagonist is a very good human. On top of that, she wanted to wish him good luck, because she is waiting for the day when he can become a president. Because when he manages that, then he will be able to accomplish whatever it is that he is trying to do there. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Lanki was completely irritated, asking why the chief, even knowing that the protagonist is a zombie, allowed him to continue there. He explains that it was never about whether he is a zombie or a human, and admits that he needs that man's strength if he wants to capture the professor. But she questions what will happen if the protagonist loses control again. The chief points out that it really does not matter, and asks whether she made the preparations. She says yes, and he promises that this time he will erase every trace of the professor for their sake. Vermint gathers all the zombies and says he has information that the king is being held hostage inside the human city. He emphasizes that the king is the only help they have in that world. So what will they do if they lose that king? All the undead say that they need to eliminate the humans to save the king. Blackie asks whether Violet is some kind of idiot because the king does not need anyone's help. Agu asks whether they should do something to interrupt that. Blackie says that unfortunately, if it is not the king himself, no one can stop it. On an aircraft carrier in the middle of the sea, the chief asks everyone to listen, because that is a direct order from Central Command. He explains that they only have one chance, so they need to capture the professor at all costs. Dawn, who was walking with the protagonist, says that place had been abandoned for a long time, and she did not imagine they would be able to keep it so well maintained. Suddenly, an army appears in front of this protagonist, saying that they are Regiment 56 and are reporting for duty. On top of that, they would like to salute the new powerful leader, Vice President Zombie. They emphasize that they are part of the command center of the 4th Division, and that from that day onward, they will follow the protagonist's orders. The troop commander says that they currently have 12,000 soldiers on standby and asks the protagonist to confirm. Zombie walks up to the commander and asks whether he is really saying that they will do anything he tells them. The commander says yes. The protagonist asks how far that goes and asks what would happen if he told a soldier to kill himself. The soldier grabs a grenade, pulls the pin, and says that the vice president's words are absolute and that it would be an honor to die for him. Zombie tells him to stop because that was only a test and a joke. He grabs the grenade and throws it far away. A man standing on top of one of the tanks says that, by the looks of it, this is just some insignificant side character, and asks whether the vice president's name is Zombie, because he had been wondering why they had sent someone strong, but the point is that he really does not understand why they sent someone as weak as the protagonist to protect such an important place. However, he says that it does not matter and introduces himself by saying that they came from the Stainless Steel Academy near the Academy of the Afterlife and were sent there to help the protagonist capture the target. Dawn is shocked and asks whether they are not the two leaders of the Steel Blade Department of the Stainless Steel Academy, President Bang and Vice President Chui. Somewhere else, another person was a little confused, saying that originally that is an internal matter of the Academy of the Afterlife, so he cannot understand why his superiors sent him to help. But in the end, helping others is something normal. However, he does not understand why they promoted a rookie to vice president and let him protect such an important strategic location. Lanki tells Gang to stop that and says that they were invited to be there to help, not to snoop into internal affairs. As an outsider, he has no authority to question the chief's decisions. At the chief's side, another person says that this is also an important part of the mission and that they are responsible for the attack, but the rookie is blocking the exit. On top of that, north of the city, there are major roads with many exits. So he would like to know why they sent only a rookie vice president to protect such an important location. The chief replies that it is because that rookie vice president can take down anyone in the blink of an eye. The man just smiles and says that apparently he is still bluffing, and asks whether he needs to remind him how strong he is. However, he says that in any case, everything is fine, because he also sent 2 members from their academy to help protect the exits, so there is nothing to worry about. The young boy tells Faye that they are already surrounding an entire city. The professor asks him to release the zombies. As soon as they release the zombies, they realize that something strange has mixed in with them. The first wave of zombies is quickly eliminated, and the 2 outsiders say that it was too easy and offered no challenge. The protagonist looks at the zombies that were eliminated and says that they are not from his tribe. Dawn merely pretends she did not hear anything. One of the outsiders walks over to the protagonist and says that by the looks of it, he realized that he is not needed there, so he can simply leave and let them take care of that place, since weaklings like the protagonist ought to go back to playing with children's toys. Dawn steps in front of him, yelling that the weaklings there are them, and asking whether he knows when to shut his mouth. But the 2 outsiders ask who allowed her to speak, and she ends up hiding behind the protagonist. Vermint appears, and Zombie asks what he's doing there. The young man starts laughing, asking what that thing is, because all of his stats are maxed out. But it is beautiful to watch, because that is the first time he has seen a chief with such a high level, and because of that, he only needs him to put on a good show. 2 hours earlier, Vermint met another subordinate who handed him gasoline and said that now there is nothing left to do there, then ran off saying that he would not dare go against the king's orders. So he is heading back first and wishes him good luck. Vermint tries to convince him, saying that everything will be fine as long as the king does not find out. But when he sees that he has simply been abandoned, he says that he does not need anyone else to eliminate all the humans. And before starting his plan, he pulls in air forcefully and ends up absorbing that toxin, which is quickly detected by the young man. Returning to the present, the protagonist was confused seeing that his subordinate was drinking gasoline. Right after that, he turns on the chainsaw and lets out a terrifying scream, shattering all the nearby windows. The pressure of the scream alone was enough to throw tanks and people backward. Vermint screams that humans are fools and calls everyone to come play a little with his chainsaw. The 2 outsiders start smiling, saying that finally something interesting appeared, because his roar alone almost made their ears explode. The protagonist grabs his friend and runs away. She asks why they are retreating, because they still have the help of the 2 department leaders. But the protagonist says that it is impossible for those 2 to defeat him. She asks what kind of joke that is, how 2 people as strong as those could not defeat just 1 zombie. The protagonist says he is not joking. They do not understand that being's strength because he has an immortal body. The 2 outsiders start laughing, seeing that whenever a strong enemy appears, the protagonist just runs, which proves that he really is trash. Chui asks President Bang to let him handle it. The president agrees, saying that will save him effort, but 1 second later his companion is struck and sent flying very far away with just 1 blow. Vermin appears in front of Bang and asks how he would like to die. Their battle begins, but the truth is that Bang was being completely humiliated. The green-haired young man starts laughing, saying that it is incredible because that monster is simply very strong. The captains were being completely humiliated by him. Vermint was toying with his prey. Meanwhile, the protagonist was watching everything from the top of a building. Dawn, frightened, says that it does not look very good, because President Bang probably will not last much longer. Bang tries to maintain his authority, saying that as president he cannot lose there, but when he notices the difference in power, he simply starts crying, screaming for his mother, and saying that he does not want to be killed. The young boy who is behind everything starts laughing, saying that the human academy is stupid. The protagonist keeps watching, and his friend says that they cannot send ordinary soldiers because they would be eliminated in a matter of seconds. The troop commander asks the vice president what they should do, but the protagonist was still confused, wondering why his subordinate had failed to recognize him. He tells Dawn that she will be sent to knock some sense into her subordinate's head. However, she immediately refuses, asking whether the vice president has gone mad and whether he did not see how strong that guy is, because even President Bang was completely humiliated, which makes her ask whether he wants her to become food for him. But Zombie asks her to hold out her arm and simply bites her. She's startled and asks whether he's taking advantage of the situation to control her mind, but the protagonist explains that it is not like that and asks her not to hit him too hard. The president was still begging for his life, saying that he was wrong and should not have made fun of him. Suddenly something strikes Vermint. Dawn calls him Chainsaw Rat, saying that that guy was not fun. Vermint looks back and asks who was approaching, but all that could be heard was her laughter. Dawn had received the protagonist's power and, while dragging her weapon, asks whether he would not like to play a little with her. The zombie cells spread, and genetic nucleotides were replaced. Vermint starts laughing and asks whether she really said she wanted to play with him, asking who she thinks she is. She keeps laughing, saying that he is nothing but a bully, and asks what made him think he is so special because if he really is as strong as he thinks, he just needs to stop talking nonsense and come play a little. She starts firing several shots at him while laughing, but Vermint is very fast and dodges every one of them. The two captains were getting ready to run. Dawn approaches her opponent and takes out 2 grenades, saying that those are her sweet desserts before the main course, causing a small explosion. But Vermint remains intact and asks whether that was some kind of attempt to tickle him. She grabs a shotgun and fires at him, but nothing happens, which only leaves her even more excited by the situation. The squad commander asks the vice president what exactly he did, and he explains that it slightly modified her genes, but by the looks of it, she can still become even more powerful. Vermint admits that the last attack hurt a little, and she starts laughing even more, saying that she is loving that feeling. Bang and Chui were completely terrified by the display of strength from those two. Vermint charges again, asking whether she thinks she can inspire fear with that insignificant strength. But Dawn was getting used to her new power and lands a direct blow on him, sending the opponent flying far away. Chui says that the girl is very powerful, so why did she pretend to be weak before? Dawn keeps getting more excited and says that now it is time to use the Bang Bang Bazooka. Vermint is completely shocked and, feeling some pain, starts drinking more fuel and says that now everything is great and he wants to keep going. Thirsty for that feeling of battle, she screams that she also cannot wait any longer. Bang and Chui realize that something very bad is about to happen. She fires the attack, but Vermint cuts the shot in half, slicing her in half as well. The two are shocked to see that the only chance they had has just been defeated. Vermint screams that he is undead and cannot be eliminated no matter what she does, because he can regenerate whenever he wants. The protagonist merely closes his hand, and her body, which had previously been split apart, simply regenerates completely. She asks whether he said he is undead because she is sorry, but she is too. Bang and Chui become even more terrified when they see her regenerating. The two of them remain there for a while, and she says that she really wants to keep playing. Bang and Chui, who are already panicking, ask what kind of lunatics they are and try to escape while calling for help. Vermint gets confused and asks what he is even looking at there and who the real zombie is. The protagonist, who had been watching, says that he did not expect Dawn to become so powerful after the genetic mutation. However, all of her bones are cracked and her muscles are tearing apart. Even if she can use genetic recombination, the pain of being cut is still real. So he needs to end that as quickly as possible. In a serious tone, the protagonist tells Vermint that even though he disobeyed orders and did not stay home, it would be better for him to stop before he gets disciplined. Dawn, who is getting more and more excited by that battle, rushes forward and lands a direct hit, sending her opponent flying very far away. She continues her attacks, putting her weapon in a rather unpleasant place. Vermint asks her to stop hitting him and shouts that he surrenders, saying that he will leave. Everyone just watches that scene, and she decides to grant his request, lowering her guard. But Vermint uses a sneak attack and lands a direct hit, sending her flying far away. The protagonist gets irritated by that and asks why Dawn believes everything her opponent says, questioning why she lowered her guard. He points out that when she relaxes her vigilance, things return to normal. With a trembling voice, she says that she did not know. Vermint gets ready to attack, laughing and pointing out that apparently his opponent had taken some stimulants, but it looks like the effect is already wearing off. And because of that, she needs to be more careful in her next life instead of believing everything zombies say. The young man who had been controlling all of this from behind starts laughing excitedly, asking what kind of zombie that is, because he is very powerful since he not only has hidden abilities, but also possesses the incredible passive skill of sneak attack. Zombie takes a deep breath since he did not want to act. The green-haired young man still thinks he is in control and orders Vermint to eliminate everyone. The three of them become desperate and scream for help. The young man notices the protagonist's presence and asks whether another one has appeared. However, he keeps smiling, thinking that it is no problem because the strength Vermont is showing is formidable and there is no one who can challenge him. But Vermint begins to tremble, and Zombie asks little Vermint whether he can remember who is standing in front of him. The young man panics, asking why that zombie stopped moving, and tries to force the command for him to act. But Vermint keeps saying nothing, only trembling. The protagonist continues pressing him and asks why he is there, since he had been ordered to stay home. Vermint remembers that another zombie had told him that a gangster was causing trouble nearby and had asked him to become a subordinate. When he remembers the conversation they had, Vermint starts laughing and asks if the gangster is the protagonist, because he does not look human and does not even resemble a zombie. And on top of that, he has a weak and fragile personality. So why should he be acting as a subordinate and taking orders from someone so mediocre? Dawn asks whether they were arguing. Bang says he does not know, but it looks like Chainsaw Boy wet his pants. Vermint was trembling in fear just from the king's presence. The young man still keeps sending commands and asking why that zombie is not attacking. The presence of the true king had completely frozen Vermint. Suddenly, the protagonist grabs his subordinate's head, asking what the problem is. The zombie who had spoken to him earlier starts screaming his name, and with a smile on his face, the protagonist asks why Vermint is no longer speaking. Because if that is the case, then he will deliver the speech and show why he is absolute and why the others should simply obey his orders. All of that was happening inside Vermint's head, so the young man kept sending commands and asking what the zombie was doing and what he was so afraid of, since he cannot die. What Four Eyes did not know was that Vermint was remembering why he does not have an immortal body. He had been cut into pieces, turned into sashimi, and hung out to dry on a tree for hundreds of years. While Vermont was fighting a mental battle, the young man with glasses kept sending commands so that he could attack. But with tears coming out of his eyes, Vermin screams the word, "Never." The command center collapses, and Vermint runs away in desperation, saying that he does not want to fight him, and that if Four Eyes wants to, then he can go fight by himself. None of them understand what exactly had just happened. Even little Four Eyes asks how that zombie got out of his control, since this is the first time that has ever happened. Irritated by the situation, he says that it is fine because he still has other zombies, and will order them to go to the protagonist and deal with everything. The professor tells him to stop and give up on that route because the academy is about to descend. In a helicopter, Lanka and Violet inform the chief that they have just arrived. Longchi asks the traitor if he is sure that the professor is down there. He answers yes and points out that the place has 6 floors and a total area of 11,000 square meters. She is surprised by the size of that place and asks what exactly they need to look for in such a huge area. One of the people who had come there to help prepares for combat, saying that problems can be solved with absolute and unrivaled force. He jumps out of the aircraft with astonishing speed, and she shouts that he is being far too careless. But his speed increases with every second, and laughing, he begins spinning with his sword in hand, telling them to watch. The impact he creates on the ground is so strong that a huge explosion occurs there, creating a crater. He looks up and says that it is done, asking if that was not faster than using an elevator. Lanki says that men are all the same, because they only use their muscles to solve every problem, and asks whether they do not know how to use their brains from time to time, because that could have been a trap, and they would have had no way to retreat. The chief explains that in the face of absolute power, all scenarios are the same. He also jumps from the helicopter, saying that he will leave the second line of defense to the two of them. Lanki gets irritated again, saying that one is worse than the other, and asks whether there is anything else in those stupid heads besides blowing things up. The Academy soldiers enter and start searching every location. A few minutes later, they report to the chief that areas 1 and 2 are clear. Gang asks if they escaped, but the chief explains that this is impossible since he sealed every route in and out of the city, whether by land, water, or air. Not even a tiny mosquito would get through unnoticed. Lanki outside is completely irritated, asking why they should wait there while the others go down to catch the bad guys, because if they work together, they would not be weaker than them. Violet asks her to calm down and stop complaining, since those men are superior to them. But Lanki was so offended that she said she would curse the two of them with bad luck. While all of that was happening on top of a building somewhere, the young man tells Brother Faye that they have entered. The professor tells him to begin executing Plan A. Gang arrives at a tank that has a note on it saying Zombie King inside. Confused, he takes the note in his hand and asks what that could possibly mean. On another note, it says that there is a Zombie King inside and that he is extremely dangerous, but that if he is a man, he should just open it. As soon as he reads the message, he feels mocked and asks one of his soldiers to blow it up immediately. However, the chief of the Academy of the Afterlife tells them to wait and emphasizes that they are there to capture a person and do not need to take those risks. Four Eyes tells the professor that unfortunately, Plan A did not work. Faye moves on to Plan B and activates a bomb that had been planted in the tank, causing an explosion. Gang asks whether that can really be called a trap. Four Eyes warns that the tank is open, and the professor starts laughing, saying that that day marks the beginning of the end of all humanity and that now it is time to welcome the dawn of a new, great species. He calls his creation out, saying that it may take all human lives, including his own. As the dust from the explosion starts to settle, people realize that there really is something there and ask whether that is the Zombie King. However, the zombie inside was only a child, leaving everyone unable to believe what they were seeing. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife tells his friend to be careful, because it would not have been a problem if their opponent had looked strong from the beginning. The real problem is when they appear weak and helpless, like a child. So he must not underestimate it, because he himself has already been in that kind of situation many times. But Gang simply ignores everything and uses the steel blade slash to attack. The chief shouts that he already knew that was going to happen, asking everyone to run. Gang succeeds in cutting the little zombie in half, but he simply turns into two and then joins back together again. The two chiefs do not understand what is happening there. The young man with glasses asks his assistants to release the zombies in the camps while those two are distracted. A horde of undead appears, but Lanki and her two companions were on the upper side. The young man shouts that there are too many of them and that this is bad, and immediately offers to form the line of defense. But Lanki says he does not need to worry, telling him to just stay back and watch, because she would like to warm up first since important jobs need to be handled by professionals. Letting her hair down, she takes a thin sword and begins quickly eliminating all the monsters around her. In a matter of seconds, that horde had been completely annihilated. Striking the heroic pose everyone expects, she says that if those villains thought they could cause chaos, then they will have to come up with a new plan. Four Eyes becomes completely furious, saying that that stupid witch eliminated all the zombies they released, and that if he still had that chainsaw zombie, none of this would be happening. Agu and Blackie were watching that situation. Agu, somewhat embarrassed, says that Blackie needs to keep it a secret that they have to wear masks to keep the zombie virus away. Blackie tells him not to worry, saying he will not tell anyone. He walks over to one of the zombies and shows him a picture of Vermint, asking if he has seen that other zombie before. But the foreign zombie only smacks the paper and shouts at him to get out of there. Blackie is impressed to see that outsider zombies are very rude. Agu points out that he is a little scared by the situation, because if they do not return with Vermint, the king will punish them. Blackie tells him not to panic and says that they will manage to find him and get back in time. Meanwhile, down underground, the prince of the zombies starts saying that he wants to play a little. The chief tells Gang that apparently that little zombie is mocking him. Gang gets so irritated that he charges in, saying that now he will resolve the situation, but no matter how many attacks he makes, nothing is effective against the little zombie. Gang becomes even more irritated and tells the zombie to stop running away and fight like a real man. The little zombie takes the pacifier out of his mouth and his body begins to change drastically, transforming into a beautiful woman. The two of them are shocked, asking how that is possible. Now they can call her the Queen of the Zombies. She points out that now she is ready and can play a little more seriously. With a smile on her face, she asks what the problem is and calls the two of them to come play with her. Gang remains irritated and threatens her, saying that he will cut her into pieces, and charges again to attack her, but she simply stops his sword with one finger. Frightened by that, he screams for help. Very quickly, the chief of the Academy of the Afterlife prepares himself and uses Model 1 to attack, but in 1 second he is struck by a blow and thrown very far away. Agu asks what that sound was. The chief was thrown so far that he smashed through a building and landed several kilometers away, ending up right in front of the two of them. They are surprised to see that that being is a human. Agu asks whether they should help him, because it looks like that human is about to die. But Blackie scolds him, asking what is wrong with him, because they are zombies. Suddenly, another explosion happens and Lanki realizes that the other man who had been thrown far away is the chief of the Stainless Steel Academy. Violet is frightened and asks what is happening down there. Gang, already out of strength, tries to speak but cannot. Lanki asks what he is trying to say. The zombie queen was bored because they were far too weak. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the protagonist was having a barbecue. Bang points out that he had already grilled chicken and slices of meat before, but that this is the first time he has ever seen anyone grilling eggs. The protagonist laughs and says that he really likes eating eggs. After that small display of power, Bang started treating the zombie president with respect and offers him some tea. But after tasting it, the protagonist says that the tea tastes a little dry. Bang turns toward the army and shouts at them, asking who the lazy one was that made that tea. They say they will immediately send aircraft to fetch the finest Shejing tea. Suddenly, a strange sound echoes through the city and Dawn asks what that sound was. The zombie queen, wanting to keep playing, stands up and looks at the two presidents. Violet points out that that zombie seems a little different from the ordinary ones they fought last time and that perhaps they have a very big problem to deal with. Because of that, they need to set aside their indifference toward each other, since they will have to join forces to try to deal with that threat. The queen approaches slowly. Dawn points out that there had been explosions coming from underground the entire time, but that last sound seemed much closer. The protagonist gets up and says that he is going to take a look. Meanwhile, the two women were trying to face the queen, but they were being completely overwhelmed. The queen mocks the situation, saying that their speed is pitiful, but Violet counterattacks with a direct strike. However, the queen says that besides speed, their strength is also very low. Gang manages to recover and calls for the support suit and armor forms around his body. That draws the queen's attention and she says that now things seem a little more interesting. Lanki continues trying to attack with her speed, but all of her attacks are useless since the queen dodges everything easily. Gang shouts for the two of them to hold that monstrosity off a little longer while the armor keeps transforming over his body, creating the Steel Heart Mark I. Violet tells the queen not to underestimate them. The two women prepare for a joint attack. However, the queen begins changing her body again, transforming back into a monster. With just the impact of her blow striking the ground, she sends the two of them flying away. She quickly moves toward Gang, saying that she wants to settle it with a single blow. The two of them prepare and unleash their attacks, but once again, Gang gets the worst end of it and is hurled very far away. Even so, he stands up again, telling the zombie to come at him. The two presidents, completely frightened, ask what is happening with that thing. Gang and the monster prepare again and collide with their attacks, creating terrifying pressure. The force is so great that an explosion occurs, drawing the protagonist's attention. Half of Gang's body had been destroyed, and the zombie says that unfortunately the human lost. Even without strength and with his body trembling, the chief of the Stainless Steel Academy refuses to admit defeat. The zombie says that apparently that human is the type who refuses to admit defeat until he sees the gates of hell with his own eyes. The protagonist group approaches a place, and Dawn asks whether that really is the location and what could be hiding there. The protagonist senses a very familiar smell and looks in the direction where the main battle is taking place. The zombie realizes that Gang truly is not going to surrender until he shows his true power. So he begins modifying his body once again and transforms into a young man, asking what he thinks of that new form. The two presidents cannot understand what is really happening, since that zombie keeps transforming again and again. Four Eyes becomes desperate, telling the professor that they have completely lost control over the monster. But the professor says that it is fine because that is the true zombie. Since the king is the protagonist and a zombie turned back into a man, he says that he will call him Prince. The prince of the zombies says that he does not think there is any need to continue that fight, but Gang and the two presidents attack simultaneously. However, the prince only laughs, asking whether they are really trying to make sports attacks because that is pathetic. With only the snap of his fingers, the pressure is so strong that it pushes the three of them backward, completely shattering all the glass around them. The two women are thrown so far away that they land right in front of the protagonist. Dawn, Bang, and Chewie get worried when they see their presidents on the verge of death. Gang, who had managed to recover half of his body, refuses to lose and says that he is not dead yet and can keep fighting. The zombie prince keeps mocking his opponent's strength and points out that he will let him live, but that he is still very stubborn. Violet explains the situation to the protagonist, saying that he is the zombie king the professor created and that they need to run away. The prince gives the order for the zombies to attack. Chewie says that this time it is over and that there is nothing they can do. Lanky asks Zombie to order a retreat because they can flee that place without turning it into a cemetery. The professor, who was watching all of this, keeps laughing, telling the zombies and humans to be completed by the power of the Zombie King. The protagonist, irritated that someone else was claiming the title of Zombie King, throws the two women to the ground and shows who the true king is, ordering everyone to disappear immediately. The zombies who had been enraged and trying to attack stop in front of him and begin trembling in fear. Even the prince, who was a little farther away, is surprised and asks who the protagonist is. Already assuming his original form, Zombie orders all the zombies to lie down on the ground and begins walking over them, asking the zombie prince if he really is the king, because if that is the case, then what should he be called? The protagonist keeps walking over the zombies while his companions are taken away. Zombie looks at his adversary and asks what the problem is and why he is no longer speaking. All the zombies from before had piled themselves up beneath his feet. The prince is astonished while the protagonist asks whether the cat got his tongue. Gang is shocked when he sees the protagonist's true form. The prince smiles, saying that in the end, his new opponent is a fellow zombie. Gang asks the Academy of the Afterlife whether they have a problem in the head since they allowed a zombie to become vice president. Violet says that it is none of his business. The prince tells the protagonist that he has a suggestion and points out that the last one standing should be named King. Zombie says that he agrees. The prince smiles and says that he is ready to begin. The protagonist says that there is a time to eat and a time to work, but for fighting, any time will do. The prince starts attacking and lands a punch right on the protagonist's face. Zombie takes the punch as if it were nothing and asks what is going on and whether the prince is hungry. He counterattacks with a punch, sending the prince flying very far away. The pressure from the punch throws all the other zombies into the air. Zombie tells his opponent that he had better eat better before trying to embarrass himself like that again. The attack was so strong that the prince was thrown out of the continent, crashing into a ship in the open sea. Four Eyes and the professor could not believe what they were seeing, but the prince had not yet been defeated. He starts smiling, saying that that feeling is incredible. Four Eyes tells the professor that they cannot analyze that new zombie that just appeared. The prince dives underwater, grabs a submarine, and starts flying with it, leaving the two of them horrified at that display of strength. The prince hurls the submarine into the middle of the city, saying that now he is fully warmed up. Dawn says that it would be better if they got out of there. Blackie was trying to help, but Agu stops him, telling him to look to the side. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife was irritated, thinking that those two idiots were cutting all the pieces that needed to be preserved and preserving all the pieces that needed to be cut. Agu points out that this is the king's moment. Suddenly, the protagonist bursts out from beneath the submarine and calls the prince to come play a little more. The prince tries to flee, saying that he will not be caught again, but the protagonist grabs him easily, while Violet and Lanky flee with their subordinates. Gang asks whether the protagonist really is a zombie. Zombie asks his opponent why he is trying to run away, and pulling him back, lands a kick in his face that nearly sends him out of the planet, but he was tied by a rope. Irritated by that, the prince grabs the rope that was holding him, saying that he can do that too. But the protagonist snaps the rope, saying that indeed he can. The prince comes crashing down, creating a huge explosion and sending the submarine flying upward, leaving everyone there shocked. The protagonist merely laughs. The prince attacks him, saying that he was not running away because he only wanted to change places. Zombie is also sent flying into the open sea and lands on top of an aircraft carrier, leaving the carrier's crew worried. The protagonist says that apparently his opponent likes throwing things around. The prince asks why the protagonist cares and points out that he can also throw things, if he has the ability. Agu and Blackie bring the chief of the Academy of the Afterlife to watch the battle. The chief becomes frightened, saying that they need to get out of there right now because he knows the protagonist is strong, but he knows the professor's capabilities even better. He points out that the professor is a genius who appears only once a century among humans, and that a single one of his experiments can turn an ordinary person into an unbeatable weapon. So if they do not get out of there right now, they might die. Blackie starts laughing and tells the human to shut up and take a good look. He points out that no one can defeat the true king. The only thing that can defeat him is God himself. The protagonist moves with terrifying speed, vanishing from where he stood and appearing right in front of the prince, who is shocked when he sees that the protagonist's speed has increased. Zombie's punch sends the prince out of the planet. He asks where he is, but when he looks ahead, he realizes it's already too late. The entire aircraft carrier with all the planes on top of it had also been thrown out of the planet, striking the prince while he was already on the moon. No one could believe the terrifying and absolute display of strength the protagonist possessed, but to him, that was only play. The prince, trapped on the moon, stays quiet for a moment, and Dawn points out that there is really no need for them to run because it is useless. No matter where they go, the fight will still reach them. Suddenly, the prince screams that he is not finished yet and pushes the aircraft carrier back toward Earth, leaping toward the protagonist and saying that the fight is not over. He tells the protagonist to stop being arrogant. Zombie looks up and starts laughing because he was excited by the battle and prepares himself before making a terrifying leap, saying that they can keep playing. His attack strikes the nuclear reactor and a huge explosion occurs in the sky, terrifying everyone because of the size of it. The others can only try to protect themselves. The two return to the ground and the protagonist keeps mocking him, laughing and asking his opponent what the problem is, because he thought he wanted to play a little more. Things like the wounds he just suffered are nothing more than a small itch. The prince could not believe his opponent's strength. Meanwhile, the others were asking if everyone was all right and whether the battle had ended. But the prince gathers all his power and says that this is not over yet, because he has a proposal. Since they are the same kind and cannot defeat each other, then why keep fighting instead of cooperating with each other? Because that way they could destroy that world together. And if he wants, they can divide the world into two parts. So each one gets half, and they never enter each other's side. People remain frightened by that because the battle had reached a completely different level. The prince asks what the protagonist has to say about that proposal. The true king stands up, saying that he has no interest in destroying the world. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife remains worried, saying that all of that is very illogical, and repeats that they need to run, because even though the protagonist is very strong, his opponent is not weak. So they need to preserve the situation and their strength in order to find another opportunity to attack. But Blackie tells him to stop being weak and shut his mouth, asking if he himself was not the one who said that the king could transform only once. The Academy chief cannot believe it. Zombie keeps laughing, saying that his opponent is not worthy of working alongside him, and asks how he dared to say that each of them should have half, because only the weak talk about destroying the world or ruling it every single day. Dawn asks what they're talking about since they are too far away. The prince continues to rage when he hears that he is not worthy, but the protagonist releases even more of his power, saying that apparently his opponent will not understand until he truly receives a proper lesson. The protagonist's body begins to transform once again. His skin, which had looked like that of a zombie, starts taking on the color of human skin. His body changes drastically into human form, leaving everyone shocked. After finishing the transformation, his gaze alone causes panic in his opponent. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife, who had dozed off, is awakened by a slap so that he can see for himself, because now the protagonist was no longer the king of the zombies, but a new god. The two presidents say that the protagonist transformed again and that he looks completely different from the zombie king the professor created. Now he looks human. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife says that now the protagonist is even stronger than last time. The prince, confused, asks what is happening there. The energy released by the protagonist's transformation was so great that it changed the atmosphere and climate of that region, causing a heavy rainstorm. Even though he was frightened by that, the prince does not give up and charges at the protagonist, asking whether he is human or zombie. However, with just one movement, Zombie stops the falling raindrops and slices his opponent's entire body. Everything, including the humans around them, begins floating. Ships, whales, and everything else simply behaved as if gravity no longer existed. Zombie stares at the false king and says that he is the father of all zombies. A giant cyclone the size of a continent begins to form, and all things once again become subject to gravity. Violet says that that is not something a zombie can do. A whale is thrown on top of one of the buildings, terrifying the professor and his subordinate. The prince, who is lying in pieces on the ground, asks how that is possible. Four Eyes asks the professor whether he had ever seen a zombie like that before, but the professor says that he has never seen anything like it. The prince stands up and uses regeneration to recreate the limbs that had been destroyed. He asks the protagonist what he is doing because all of that is useless, and assumes that even if he cannot defeat Zombie, the protagonist also cannot eliminate him, since from the very beginning of that conversation, zombie kings are basically forms of life that cannot be killed. So even if the protagonist cuts him into countless pieces, he can still regenerate again. Zombie uses his powers to draw his opponent's body into his hand and grabs him by the neck, saying that apparently he must have misunderstood something about death, asking whether the prince truly thinks that he needs to destroy someone physically in order to eliminate them. The protagonist looks into his opponent's soul and the prince begins screaming in fear, but he starts having a vision of ships surrounding the planet. However, the protagonist's power was so great that a cataclysm was created. Countless cyclones, earthquakes, and everything else began striking the world. He kept shouting the word, "Ancients." An army advanced against him, and one of them says that he is Siege 1351, and that for the 6th time they are ending human civilization, but that this time it will be the last. But the protagonist changes form once again, destroying all of them, as if they were absolutely nothing. The prince was in a mental collapse, and in his mind the protagonist's eyes alone made it feel as though he was being obliterated from the inside out. Suddenly he breathes his last breath, and his body stops moving. Things calm down, and the humans ask what is happening and whether it is really over. Zombie releases the prince, who falls to the ground showing no sign of life. The chief of the Academy of the Afterlife asks what is happening and why that zombie is no longer moving. Blackie explains that the false king probably became afraid of death because of the true king's 3rd transformation. The Academy chief cannot understand how anyone could be so afraid of death in that way. The professor also cannot believe how that is possible, but Four Eyes says that unfortunately it is over. He tries to grab the professor, saying that all the area's defense ships are already gone and that they need to try to escape while they still can, because if they do not leave now, they may not be able to escape anymore. However, the protagonist appears beside them, making all of them scream in fear. Four Eyes asks the zombie how he managed to discover that they were there, since they had never revealed themselves. They are frightened and trembling in terror. Zombie asks whether they prefer to surrender peacefully or whether they want to go meet that zombie king, and says that they have 1 second to decide. Everyone kneels and surrenders except the professor. But it did him no good, and that is how the professor, who was supposedly meant to be eliminated, ended up being captured alive by Zombie. While everyone was being arrested, the protagonist was alone, crouching. Violet asks what is happening to him, but Dawn says that she does not know either. The truth is that the protagonist does not like doing that. Using his strength is something very frightening, because one small mistake could make him completely destroy the world. That is why he wants to be a good zombie. Violet asks Dawn to go over there and ask what is wrong, but she refuses, saying that she does not have the courage to get close, and asking whether Violet saw how frightening the protagonist can be when he is angry. But Violet shoves her, telling her to go already because if she does, she will be promoted to vice president of the zombies. Even trembling with fear, she goes over there and asks whether he is all right, saying that they are already prepared to return. But the protagonist stands up and says that he is hungry, and that alone is enough to nearly scare her to death. On top of that, he points out that he really wants the tear-resistant shirt he had asked for earlier. Dawn realizes that he is completely passive again. She asks whether he can remember what he just did. He says yes, though it is a little blurry. He points out that he has already lost his sense of time, but clearly remembers eliminating many strange zombies like that one. However, all of them were very weak compared to his true power, so he does not care to remember when or how he eliminated all of them. Meanwhile, inside the car, the professor starts laughing and his subordinate asks what is wrong. But the professor keeps talking to himself, saying that he never imagined anything as strong as the protagonist, and thrilled by that display of absolute power, becomes obsessed, saying that he will definitely obtain a sample of that being's genes and create a creature even stronger. And that was how the zombie king created by the professor was eliminated by fear of zombie, and the incident with the professor finally came to an end. Meanwhile, in a secret meeting, the committee asked the protagonist whether he has any problem becoming a president, He replies that he has none, and the committee emphasizes that he needs to remember that becoming a president is not just about being strong, but about being able to maintain and protect his citizens. In addition, if he fails to make the city exceed a population of 10 million before the deadline, the title will be revoked. After everything is explained, they ask which city he would like to take. Zombie smiles and says that if that is the case, he would like to take the city where he captured the professor, City H. The committee is confused, saying that it is a deserted city with no people, and that if he wants to raise chickens, he first needs eggs to hatch. One of the committee members shouts that even if he does not have eggs, he should at least have a single cell, and that place does not even have a single human hair, so how is he supposed to develop it? Because he needs to keep in mind that if the population does not reach the required level, his presidential position will be revoked immediately. But the protagonist insists, saying that he wants that city regardless of the situation. Because of his insistence, the committee ends up agreeing, granting the city to him and appointing him as president. Some people question how the Academy of the Afterlife found someone as foolish as that, because there were so many perfectly good cities, and he ended up choosing one that was completely deserted. So how is he supposed to develop it? Even Violet cannot understand the criteria behind his choice. But after becoming president, the only zombie regiment army was expanded into 4 regiments that helped protect the city. On that day, a remarkable historical moment took place. The children, together with their zombie mother, say that their new home is very big and that there are even humans there. It was a unique sight, with human soldiers helping the zombies move into their new home. The protagonist, together with his close aides, simply watched the move. Blackie says that he has a report to present to His Majesty and says that all the new citizens were moved into the city according to orders. The soldiers shout, and a small child gets scared and runs to his zombie mother, saying that they are going to use the metal rods again. But the soldiers had only shouted to get attention and point out that President Zombie's orders are absolute, like a commandment from a god. So the president's people are the same as their people, and they are there to escort them safely to their new homes. Fur gets excited, saying that they finally have their own city. The protagonist points out that sometimes, in a race toward prosperity, it is not necessary to maintain or create a war with others. Agu asks the king what they should do with Vermint, since he has already been hanging there for a few months. Zombie tells them to leave him hanging a little longer. He was hanging there in punishment at the city council building. Vermint shouts that he was wrong and promises to be obedient from now on because he does not want to become an idiot zombie. The zombies were finally living a dignified life, thanking the king for giving them a home. Meanwhile, Violet was trying to train with Dawn, but she was being completely humiliated. She asks how that can be happening, but Dawn only laughs at the situation. Violet cannot understand how she can have 2 completely different personalities. Dawn only keeps laughing and says that she can still fight. Violet feels challenged and charges once again, but Dawn twists her neck backward, terrifying the president, forcing her to retreat and question whether she is still human. Dawn rushes at her at full speed and fires countless shots, making the president run. Dawn asks if Violet does not think that now she can become a president too. Violet remains under pressure, only dodging the attacks, but she decides to go on the offensive, saying that if Dawn really wants to become a president, then she had better show her most powerful abilities. Dawn realizes that the next attack is going to hit her, and activates the cells the protagonist had given her. Violet unleashes countless slashes, but Dawn dodges and asks whether the president is really trying, because how can she use her most powerful abilities if she keeps acting like that? Violet attacks again, cutting Dawn in half, but Dawn only keeps smiling. The president gets worried, asking why she did not dodge. However, Dawn's body begins regenerating, and Violet asks how that can possibly be fair. The president retreats, saying that this strength is far too exaggerated and questions what Zombie did to her. Dawn asks if now she is worthy of becoming a president, and moving even faster than before, attacks the president, landing a direct blow and throwing her against the wall. Violet admits defeat, saying that they need to stop there. Dawn returns to her normal form and her personality changes too. She gets scared, asking her big sister if she's alright, and emphasizing that she did not do that on purpose. Violet asks if she really is not a zombie, even after being bitten by the protagonist. Dawn says no, because she went through a full examination in the laboratory the day before and everything, even her body cells, is normal. Basically, there are no changes in her body. The president asks how she is supposed to explain turning her head 360 degrees and regenerating. Dawn hesitates a little, but says that she does not know either. However, that feeling is as if she can transform whenever she wants. Yet she does not feel anything different. And whenever she feels a little down, she herself can give herself a few stimuli to become stronger. And the best part is that she feels no side effects even after using it for a long time. Violet listens to that whole explanation and gets a little irritated. Dawn notices that the president's reaction is not right and asks if something is wrong. Violet stands up and shouts at her to move aside. Dawn asks where the president is going and asks once more if something is wrong, but Violet only runs off in irritation, saying that it is none of her business. The people notice that the president is a little agitated and ask where she is going. She says she is going to City H and runs to a plane, crossing the country. Sometime later, already in City H, she keeps running in desperation, while her subordinates run after her asking her to wait. Meanwhile, in the city council building, the protagonist was in a meeting with his close aides. He was assigning tasks and tells Fur to be responsible for the Blue Flowers District. Ah Gu will be the chief of the city police department. Lang will be responsible for civil administration, and Blackie will be responsible for the city treasury, which means that from that moment on, all of the city's money will be under his care. However, that responsibility is enormous, and the protagonist emphasizes that he must exercise control and account for every single cent of the zombie city treasury. Suddenly, Violet bursts through the door and the protagonist asks what brings her there. She runs up to him and Zombie points out that she arrived at the perfect time because he was just about to go meet her to report the city's current situation. But Violet says nothing and simply makes him open his mouth and bite her. As soon as she gets bitten, she runs back and thanks him, saying that he can do whatever he wants with her. He's left a little confused by that situation. Outside, one of her subordinates says that she is really fast. On top of that, he scolds her, asking if she forgot about that spy and says that she should not forget that the protagonist can control people's minds. So how can she let him bite her like that? Her position is very high, and if he controls her and makes her do something bad, what would happen then? But she had already made up her mind and says that if she can get a ridiculous increase in strength, the ability to reattach parts of her body, and on top of that never die, then she does not mind doing whatever he wants her to do. Even if he wants her to do a sensual dance in the middle of the street, she does not mind fulfilling his wishes. After that, the protagonist began to reform and develop the city he had received. After assigning work to his subordinates, the city slowly began to function. Clothing stores, hair salons, real estate agencies, and even a driving school. Everything was moving along exactly as it should. The protagonist looked at all of that and felt satisfied and fulfilled with the situation. And that was how the king began his calm life. Inspector Shane takes the protagonist's file and sees that he has a flexible personality, completely lacking in any striking personal traits, as if he were just another passerby. She truly cannot understand why the Academy of the Afterlife placed that person as the city's president. A subordinate approaches and asks whether she heard what the chief of the Stainless Steel Academy had said, because he was saying that the Academy of the Afterlife is inviting a zombie to become president, which means he was talking about that guy. The inspector says that this is normal among them because they are competing between academies, and it is nothing new for them to lie about each other. However, even if he was not lying, she also did not like the protagonist since he does not have the personality of a leader, whether he's a zombie or not. So perhaps she will have to go there in person to see for herself what is really going on. Meanwhile, at the North Pole, a group of people was gathering. Professor Strange points out that he had heard a rumor that they had discovered the body of the ancient people there. A young man says that it is true that the body is a dried corpse thousands of years old, and that they found it while carrying out some experiments. The body is buried 500 meters deep in the ice, but they are trying to extract it using a crane. The professor tells them to be careful not to damage the body because, if it really is an ancient one, it could become a great discovery for all of human civilization. The team takes the utmost care in recovering the body, and the professor, excited and smiling, says that he truly hopes that it will be a revolution for ancient civilization research, because as president of the Academy's archaeological department, this is the first time he has felt so nervous. The crane manages to pull out a massive block of ice and slowly begins lowering it. A mummified body with a female appearance was truly inside the ice. The professor is astonished and asks if that is real, but suddenly something approaches the young man, covers his mouth, and bites his neck. Frightened, the professor asks who or what that is, because it is not part of his research team. But the others simply shove the professor aside and the leader tells them to use him as a sacrifice. Those people ask the professor to stop struggling because they only need a little blood. As soon as the block of ice is placed on the ground, they begin breaking the ice to remove the body from inside it. As soon as the ice is removed, the woman who had been trapped inside steps out as if nothing had happened. Everyone present kneels, greeting the Blood Queen. They shout that they wish the Blood Queen a long life and eternal youth. But in a serious tone, she tells them to answer whether that damned zombie is still alive. One of her disciples says that he is still alive, and that even after 1,000 years, he is still more alive than ever. However, even after he wiped out a human civilization last time, now he is together with the humans, and he himself started rebuilding his own clan. Another subordinate tells her to be very careful, but the queen promises that she will not lose to him again. In Guangdong province, at the academy headquarters, the protagonist was enjoying some tea until he receives the information that someone was calling for him. Inside the headquarters, the whole group from the Academy of the Afterlife was gathered. The young man who had been bitten earlier was screaming in pain. Violet asks what that thing is, because she has never seen anything like it. Lanki says that it also looks like a zombie, but according to the database, he is a member of the exploration team from the nearby province. However, the boy was found wandering at the North Pole. On top of that, the archaeological team leader who had been with him disappeared. Violet points out that they must call a professional. A short while later, the president of the undead arrives in a car and his whole army welcomes the president. As soon as he enters the building, some people begin staring. A man walks up to him and introduces himself, saying that he is President Ying of the Iron Staff Academy. On top of that, he says that he heard the protagonist was one of the people who captured the professor. The protagonist greets him and says yes, but soon walks away. Ying smiles, saying that by the looks of it, that young man is nothing more than another assistant. But that makes the protagonist happy, saying that now he can shake hands with other humans and that he is halfway toward fulfilling his goal. Elvis Presley smiles and says that just by looking at the protagonist, he can already tell that he is weak and questions who had the courage to turn him into a president. Chief Gang gets frightened when he sees that the protagonist was there and thinks that those people apparently no longer want to live. The man with glasses asks where Chief Gang went, but the chief had hidden in fear, saying in a trembling voice that if he had known the protagonist was coming there, he would have stayed home. A short while later, Zombie goes to the room where the patient was. One of the doctors asks him to take a look and try to figure out what kind of monster that boy has become. But the protagonist points out that he does not even know what he himself is. So how is he supposed to know what kind of monster the boy is turning into? However, as soon as he looks at the boy's neck, he notices 2 puncture marks and is surprised. Violet notices that and asks what he found. The boy who had previously been completely out of control becomes afraid when he sees the protagonist. Zombie had transformed by accident because he got excited after realizing that the Blood Tribe had returned. His excitement was starting to go out of control and his power was released unintentionally, causing a massive explosion in the place. The young man who had turned into a member of the Blood Tribe was crying and trembling in fear, while the protagonist says that it is ironic because he could swear that members of that tribe had already been wiped out. The members of the other academies are thrown around as if they were nothing but paper. They ask what happened and why that president called Zombie suddenly blew everything up. The protagonist continued excited, saying that all of this was very interesting because he was certain that he had eliminated every last member of that species. But now he can see. He grabs the young man by the neck, ordering him to say where Little Red is, that little girl who likes poisoning him. But the young man screams desperately, saying that he does not know anything and begs for his life because he only became a vampire the day before. The people who had looked down on the protagonist begin to get scared, asking if that guy really is just an insignificant assistant, because that kind of strength is impossible. Chief Gang, who had already been frightened before, now panics and says that he knew it and should have stayed at home. The protagonist calms down and returns to his normal form. His companions run up to him, asking what he discovered. Violet asks what the Blood Tribe is that he had just mentioned. The protagonist points out that everyone needs to be extremely careful in the coming days after the Blood Tribe. Suddenly, he stops talking and makes a serious face. Everyone is startled, afraid of what it could be, but he apologizes because he forgot what he was going to say. The president yells at him, asking if his brain stops working when he goes back to his normal state. He apologizes once again, but he had really forgotten. The protagonist keeps apologizing, saying that next time he will make sure to remember what he is going to say. The others say that in the end, he really is just an assistant, but with a single look from him, the two begin trembling in fear. Somewhere else in the rain, one of the queen's subordinates asks what she thinks of that house, but the queen was not at all happy about it since they were in the middle of nowhere, huddled together like homeless people. Suddenly, 2 people arrive and toss a coin on the ground, saying that it was always said that the cities under that government were all well managed, so why are there still people living on the streets? The queen gets irritated, but her subordinate asks her to control herself and not stoop to their level. Her other subordinate sees that it is money and gets excited to pick it up. Seeing that scene, she becomes even more irritated and throws a can against the wall, asking why they even bothered reviving her if the clan had fallen to such a low level. But her subordinate starts crying, saying that she has no idea what their lives have been like over these last 1,000 years. She says that when the queen became a dried corpse because of the protagonist, all of them could do nothing but watch from afar. After that, he started exterminating the entire tribe. To survive and escape that divine punishment, they pretended to be lifeless. And because of Zombie's threat and absolute power, they chose not to appear during all those 1,000 years. No matter where they were in that world, they always tried to hide as much as possible, both from humans and from zombies, which means they had not left that little alley for 1,000 years. She asks the queen to look at Landling and see how he became an idiot. The queen says that then all of it was pointless and that there was no need for her to have been revived, because nowadays she is no longer an opponent for the protagonist. She can barely touch a single strand of his hair. Landling says that she is wrong because the reason they revived her is that they obtained a crucial piece of recent information. Reedy points out that they managed to find someone who can help her become invincible. The other subordinate agrees, and the queen asks who it is. Lanling shows a photo of the professor, saying that he is the man who can make that happen. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the others were looking at the professor and his followers. Zombie asks why they still have not finished that guy off, because every time this happens, the person always escapes and brings back new problems. Violet explains that unfortunately they cannot do that, because first, they need to find the hidden experiments and the research the professor was planning to use against them. On top of that, the professor has many spies planted among the academies, so they need to use the professor as bait to lure them all in. The protagonist keeps saying that he can escape and asks whether they have anything prepared for that. But Ying starts laughing and shouts that that is impossible, asking how he could run away when he's already imprisoned like that. He points out that the protagonist was responsible for helping capture the professor, so because of that, he may be taken to visit and inspect the security. They leave the command center, where they had only been watching through the screens, and he is taken to the prison. They explain that that is a state-of-the-art prison, built especially to keep the professor there. They dug through an entire mountain. It is 3,000 meters deep and has 150 floors. There are 100,000 armed guards, and even by elevator it takes 30 minutes to go from the top to the bottom. On top of that, they have rocket launchers, anti-intruder weapons, and laser cannons. So all of that is just the appetizer. One president is guarding every 100 floors, for a total of 30 presidents and 2 chiefs watching that place. So how could one person possibly escape that level of security? On top of that, he says that they also installed bombs, so the professor is currently tied to the bomb detonator, and the power of the blast is greater than 10,000 tons of TNT. When someone gets close to him, the bomb will detonate, and even if someone manages to free him, they will die in the explosion. So even if a god were to descend there, all he would be able to take out would be a lifeless corpse. The protagonist, even in his basic state, feels secondhand embarrassment when he sees the humans' disorganized actions. He steps back, laughs, and says that he wishes them good luck, but he needs to leave. Meanwhile, in a distant alley, Ying's image was already in Her Majesty's hands. Upon discovering that they had put bombs on the professor, the queen says that they are nothing but a bunch of disgusting men. As soon as Zombie leaves, Ying tells Violet that the inspector has already gone to President Zombie's city for an inspection, and asks if she's not going to warn her little boyfriend. She gets a little irritated and says that apparently he is the one who wants to date the protagonist, and asks why he is giving her that information. Ying says that Chief Gang told the inspector that President Zombie built a city for zombies, and that as for whether the president is or is not a zombie, that does not matter to him because he only recognizes strength, but she simply ignores him. Meanwhile, the protagonist was walking through the city saying that human cities really are very prosperous. Inside the prison, Four Eyes was disappointed, saying that this time, everything is over. But the mad professor was still obsessed with the idea of obtaining the protagonist's genes. His subordinate asks what he is talking about and points out that they will be executed very soon. But the professor explains that this will not happen, because before they can obtain all the research he made, they will not do anything. And before being captured, he had already instructed people to send his research data to places that even he himself does not know, so that bunch of idiots will regret keeping him alive. Four Eyes says that the protagonist is very powerful, so he has no idea how they could ever get his DNA. And even if they did manage it, it is basically impossible to create something stronger than that monster. But the professor keeps smiling, saying that solving that is very simple. As long as they can obtain a vessel strong enough to contain Zombie's genome, things will be easier. Four Eyes asks them not to talk about that there because that place has the highest level of security, and they are just ordinary people, so how could they possibly escape? The professor falls silent, and the person who is about to bring the food activates a delivery robot. As soon as the robot approaches, it places food into the professor's mouth, and Four Eyes immediately realizes what is happening. A communicator had been placed inside the professor's mouth, and he asks where the body of the zombie king he had created is. The man replies that it is being kept in Dr. Yino's laboratory on floor 200. The professor says that is very good and asks him to simply continue following the instructions and protecting the vessels properly. While the protagonist was walking around the city enjoying the peace, his cell phone rings. Violet says that there is something he should know and explains that Chief Gang reported him to the inspector. The chief said that he was creating a city for zombies, and that right now the inspector is on her way to his city to take a look. On top of that, she points out that the inspector is the province's auditor, and that her job is to keep watch over the lifestyle and conduct of all presidents. So if she finds out that he really is a zombie, he will be fired immediately. In a trembling voice, the protagonist asks whether the inspector would believe him if he said he is a human. Violet scolds him, saying for him not to act as if she herself had not gone to his city and seen zombies walking around everywhere. So he knows better than anyone what he really is. After that, she hangs up, and he shouts that now it is over because he does not know what he can do. But when he looks to the side, he sees some makeup. The inspector arrives at the airport and her assistant says that the plane to City H has already been prepared. She gets out of the car and says that someone with such a weak personality, completely unfit to be a president, is unacceptable, so she is aware that she needs to find a reason to fire that guy. Suddenly, several trucks begin falling from the sky. Blackie runs outside and notices that the protagonist had returned. He asks what the problem is. Zombie explains that the chief inspector is coming there to visit the city for an inspection, so they need to distribute makeup as quickly as possible so that everyone can disguise themselves. Because if the inspector discovers that they are zombies, they will take the city away. As soon as Blackie realizes how serious the problem is, he starts coordinating the others to distribute the makeup. Because if they do not want to go back to living in the ruins, they need to take care of each other's facial expressions. They try to use as much makeup as possible to improve their appearance. And even though he does not agree with it, he thinks that the king must have his reasons for making everyone act that way. Very quickly, booths for distributing makeup were set up, and the people there explain that if they do not want to go back to living under the bridge, they need to go over there and get their kit for all the zombies and share as much as possible. A zombie mother together with her son keeps looking at it. Her son asks what they are doing, and she says that for some reason, the king wants them to disguise themselves as humans. She goes to the booth, picks up her kit, and starts applying it to her face. Her son says that he wants to try it too, but she asks him to wait a little because she's still putting makeup on her face. But as soon as the child sees how different his mother looks, he gets frightened. A little later, the close aides return. As soon as the two of them see it, they're startled to realize that they are already disguised. But they ask whether Agu's disguise is not way too exaggerated, because he is barely recognizable. However, the biggest doubt is what they are going to do, since the shape of their bodies was not very suitable for pretending to be human. Blackie puts collars on them and asks if Chen is already there, because they cannot see anyone. The two wearing collars say that all of them work directly for His Majesty, so why do they need to be treated like pets? Blackie asks what they are talking about and questions whether they were pets when they were alive. A little later, the plane approaches, and soon after she appears in the city. Her subordinate says that she is very wise because taking a train to get there was a brilliant idea. The inspector says that there are many presidents in the province, and they are close to one another, so their trip was most likely already leaked. So the best way to investigate properly is to avoid the people at the top and inspect the civilians directly. That way they can see the president's city's true face. Her subordinates begin talking among themselves, and one of them asks why the inspector hates zombies so much. The other points out that it is because he is very weak and incapable. However, he says that besides the superintendent, the inspector has never had a good impression of anyone, since she is biased against everyone except the superintendent. His friend asks him to speak more quietly because if she hears that, it could cause a problem. But she turns around saying that she already heard everything and asks whether she really is biased. She points out that ever since the superintendent delegated his authority, every random cat or street fan can become a president. So only someone like Lord Superintendent is acceptable to lead humanity and bring it back to ancient glory. Therefore, only someone with an aura of dignity can be the leader of all humanity. After explaining that, she focuses on her objective, saying that it is time to begin working. One of the subordinates says that it has been quite a while since they last saw Lord Superintendent. The other says that he went out on an expedition and should be back soon. Meanwhile, at the airport, the plane had already landed and they were waiting. Blackie thinks that is very strange and asks why the inspector is not there, because she should have already gotten off the plane. Buff Piccolo says that they must have been delayed and that it is better to wait a little longer. Meanwhile, the inspection had already begun. The subordinates go to a shop and ask if they can ask a few questions. The first question is why all the products inside are made of eggs. But the shopkeeper asks what he is talking about because he cannot hear him or even see him. The agent is impressed and asks if he is a deaf and blind person. Meanwhile, his colleague was asking someone else on the street whether after the president took over that city, he had done anything to oppress the population. But the young man shouts that this never happened and points out that the king is super kind to everyone. Because not only did he give them a good house to live in for free, but he also provides free eggs every month. However, the young man's arm falls to the ground, leaving the agent terrified by the situation. The boy picks up his arm and runs off, saying that he heard his mother calling him for dinner, and explains that it is only a prosthetic, and they do not need to worry about anything. The inspector was completely irritated, asking why there is not a single person with a normal mind in that city because it is the first time she has seen humans as retarded as zombies. She asks if it is possible that the protagonist built a city full of weirdos and lunatics. However, she tells them to write that down because she can use that information to remove him from his position. One of the soldiers notices that the protagonist was standing still, staring into nothing, and asks if there is any problem. Agu also comes closer, asking what happened. The soldier says that he also does not know because the protagonist started acting like that after eating lunch. Agu looks at the situation and realizes that his king had started drooling and trembling. Irritated, he grabs the guard by the neck and asks whether he put anything strange in the king's food. The soldier says that he does not really know whether he made any mistake because the protagonist had said that he was hungry, so they prepared some spicy scrambled eggs. Agu asks if he said spicy because that is very bad. He explains that the king cannot eat that. The soldier, a little frightened, asks what happens if he eats it. Agu, terrified, explains that pepper is like a stimulant for his king and that now he will be stuck in berserker mode for at least a month. He calls Blackie and screams, saying that the king ate spicy scrambled eggs and that the situation is not looking very good. Blackie gets scared and asks if he really was unable to get rid of all the pepper. Agu says that he also does not know how the soldiers managed to get that, but the most important thing now is to know what they are going to do. Blackie says that it is useless, because even if he asks what should be done, he has no idea, since no one can stop someone like the king. Tanis asks if Blackie thinks the protagonist is going to kill the inspection team. Frightened by this situation, he says that unfortunately that is very likely to happen. Chen calls her team and says that it is better for them to leave because there is nothing else to inspect there. However, she notices a truck flying in her direction and dodges. The protagonist lands on top of the truck, crushing it completely. Terrified, she asks what is happening there, but the protagonist starts smiling while staring at her, saying that he would very much like to meet the inspector who has been after him, because he will take her on a tour through the city. The agents with her are horrified, asking what is going on. The protagonist was still staring at the inspector, who, trembling in fear, asks who he is. The protagonist keeps staring and asks how she can forget him so quickly, then introduces himself by saying that he is Zombie, the person she had been looking for all this time. As soon as they hear the name, the three of them panic, and the inspector says that she truly did not imagine he would be like that. The protagonist says that he simply removed his mask and starts walking toward her. Terrified, she asks him to wait and not come any closer. Zombie snaps his fingers, saying that the inspector traveled all that way, so he prepared some special gifts for her. He explains that he is a good host, so she needs to enjoy them. With a murderous aura and a cold look, he tells her not to worry and points out that they do not eat people. He lifts her up like a sack of potatoes and explains that this is a school zone, so there is not much for her to see there. Therefore, he would like to change locations. With a jump, he flies off, making her scream in fear. Almost leaving the planet, she screams for him to wait. Her subordinates panic when they see that he jumped so high, but say that they cannot just stand there watching and need to do something. The protagonist's close aides notice that the inspector is with him, and that they need to get there immediately. High in the air, he lifts her even higher and tells her to take a good look, because that is the city she wanted so badly to inspect. He points out that it has more than 2 million square meters, and that they even opened construction land. They have numerous white-collar workers, publicly traded companies, and construction workers. Therefore, they have many jobs there, and the plan is for that to expand even more. He points out that all of that can generate billions in tax revenue for Guang City Hall every year. Chen, who is completely terrified while being dragged everywhere, says that she understands already and begs him to put her back on the ground. But the protagonist simply ignores her, saying that now they need to talk a little about law and order. He returns to the ground but keeps dragging her around, saying that they always obey all traffic laws and regulations and that no one is allowed to violate them. A disguised driver ends up letting his leg fall off, cannot brake in time, and runs the red light toward the protagonist. While explaining traffic laws, he points out that if there is any infraction, they are simply sent flying back, and he kicks the truck, sending it flying very far away. The truck flies so far that it gets stuck on top of a skyscraper. Blackie goes over there to save the driver. The inspector screams that the protagonist just killed someone, but he says no, and points out that that is impossible because all his subordinates are incomparable powerhouses and would never let the citizens die. Her subordinates run over to her and the protagonist throws her back to them. He turns his back and walks away, saying that he knows very well why she is there. However, he will let her return alive, but he wants to make one thing very clear. With a terrifying stare, he looks at her and says that that city now belongs to him and that no one can stop him. He says that he hopes he made that perfectly clear, but if she truly thinks she has already lived long enough, then she can try to do something to take the city away. Her subordinates are horrified, and one of them says that they need to go back now because his legs have already gone numb. The other asks what is wrong with that guy and questions whether that is really something a human can do. And if they compare the protagonist to the department chief, he is far more insane, which makes them ask who the idiot was who said he was weak and cowardly because that person needs to be fired immediately. The protagonist starts walking away and says that they can leave now since they do not provide free food, so they had better go before he changes his mind. The inspector tells him to wait and admits that he really did an excellent job managing that city. But as a president, others may also be capable of managing a city. However, it is also necessary to have a certain level of combat power. Upon hearing that, the protagonist stops walking and everyone is completely stunned. She continues saying that only someone with enough strength can protect an entire city. and that unfortunately she still has not seen whether he truly has enough ability to protect it. All of his subordinates run toward her and try to cover her mouth, but Zombie asks what she just said and questions whether she really wants to see if he is capable of that. Even while everyone tries to stop her, she says yes. They go to the edge of the sea and his subordinates begin getting scared, saying that they have a bad feeling. The inspector finally approaches and asks why they are there, but the protagonist's aura was so terrifying and dense that it took the shape of a demon. Agu tells the inspector that whatever happens from that point onward is entirely her fault. She asks what he is talking about, but he only points out that it no longer has anything to do with them. The protagonist simply looks at her, and she asks what he is doing. But as he releases a little of his power, the stones around him begin floating and he transforms once again into a human, leaving everyone there shocked and asking what had just happened to him. The ground and the sea begin behaving strangely. Her subordinates say that they just felt the air change and ask what he is trying to do. But when he jumps, the pressure is so great that it throws everyone backward, pushing the seawater away. They ask where the president went. Agu brings binoculars, and as soon as she looks, she is stunned because he was on another planet. Trembling, she asks how that can be possible. The protagonist looks back at Earth and focuses. The inspection team screams that that man is completely abnormal and that there is no chance he is human. As he focuses and throws a punch into the air, the pressure of the blow alone displaces an enormous mass of air. His close aides scream that that is not good at all. Agu shouts for everyone to protect themselves immediately. The mass of air displaced by the protagonist strikes the middle of the ocean, causing a massive tsunami. Agu manages to protect everyone, but the whole world feels that tremor. The alarm at the Academy headquarters goes off, saying that danger is approaching and that a level 12 tsunami has been detected. Violet could not believe what she was seeing and asks whether the world is ending. The alarm keeps ringing and level 1 defense is activated, preventing the water from entering the city. The protagonist returns to the ground, once again creating an opening in the middle of the waters, and asks whether she has seen enough now. A gigantic vortex is created and the water surrounds everyone. The inspection team was completely terrified and could barely remain standing. Having accepted the situation, they simply stay silent and get into the car to leave. The inspector says that he is a monster, and her subordinate says that there is no chance he is human, because even monsters are more human than he is. His close aides ask if that was too exaggerated and whether it is dangerous that they may want to inspect the city again. But Blackie points out that he has the feeling that this is not going to happen. The inspector lost her mind after returning, and the protagonist's city quietly received approval. At the same time, on the other side of the planet, inside the prison laboratory, several people were commenting on how strong the protagonist was, since they could not understand how he had managed to eliminate that man. They also felt it was truly a pity what had happened with the professor, because in order to create a monster of that level, he had basically been trying to create a god, and if the professor had been working for humanity, the real question would be how advanced they might be by now. While they were distracted, saying that it was impossible for that thing to still be alive, other scientists were preparing a small mixture. The professor gave the command, telling him to do only what had been agreed upon. The order was to mix CHR-47 with some secretions from the main vassal. The mixture had to follow a 7-to-1 ratio. Since the zombie king had only had his consciousness destroyed while his physical body remained intact, they needed a chance to revive him. After the mixture was ready, he would need to find the perfect opportunity to inject the solution into the zombie king's body. One of the presidents said he would step out of the room to patrol, and the other replied that they were 3,000 meters underground, so there was nothing to patrol down there. The professor's subordinate seized this opportunity and injected the liquid into the zombie king's body. The president reacted quickly, shoving him against the wall and demanding to know what he had just done. Suddenly, the zombie king opened his eyes and caused a massive explosion. Ying was startled when he saw that the alarms had been triggered and asked what was happening. The zombie king came back to life, and the professor ordered him to eliminate everyone and get him out of there, promising that if he succeeded, he would turn him into a zombie as strong as the protagonist. Meanwhile, inside an airplane, a man kicked the door open, holding a gun in his hand and shouting for no one to move, saying that if everyone behaved, then no one would get hurt. He approached the pilot and told him not to try anything funny because once they were done, the plane could return to its normal route. The Blood Queen pointed out that it seemed the place had an early warning system covering a radius of 100 kilometers, and that this was the only option for them to get inside. Lanling told her that they had self-destruct bombs planted there by the professor and asked whether she had a better battle plan. The queen replied that it was unnecessary, saying those were merely human tricks, and if she could not deal with something so simple, how could she be considered a queen? The only way to deal with those who resort to violence was to be even more violent. She ordered her disciples to eliminate everyone in their path. The presidents noticed that someone was approaching through the air. Ying shouted that it was a prison break and that everyone had to prepare to defend the place. The armed guards tried to contain the invaders, but they kept advancing. One person told everyone to stay calm because they still had the 30 presidents with them. Gang and the chief of the Beyond Academy heard a loud noise and wondered if it could be a prison escape. The Blood Queen entered the floor. A little lower, on floor 320, Ying and his companion were guarding the area. On floor 500, the chief of the Beyond Academy and gang were ready. Far below, on floor 2990, the fake zombie king was breaking free, while the professor was on the very last floor. With extreme ease, the fake zombie king defeated everyone in his path and went to the professor saying that he hated him. He questioned what made the professor think he would save him, saying that if he had to choose between the professor and the protagonist, the most important thing was for the professor to die. However, the professor remained confident with a smile on his face. He told the zombie king that after fighting the protagonist, the zombie king probably believed he was unbeatable against anyone except the protagonist. But the professor reminded him that he was his creation, and although he himself was only an ordinary human, the zombie king needed to understand one thing. If the professor wanted him alive, he would live, and if the professor wanted him dead, he would die. Therefore, his creation should not try to play games with him, since it was still very young. The fake zombie king grew somewhat irritated by that statement, but the professor told him not to worry, explaining that as long as the zombie king helped him achieve his goals and dreams, he would end his own life afterward. The zombie king felt somewhat relieved and remarked that humans were 10,000 times more terrifying than any other form of life when they went insane. He asked whether what the professor had said about making him stronger than the protagonist was true. Without hesitation, the professor accepted the responsibility and promised he would make him the strongest, adding that he never went back on his word because that was his ninja way. Meanwhile, on the upper floors, the presidents were trying to hold back the invaders. Ying asked who they were and why they were there. The queen merely stared at them, and after a few seconds said she did not want to waste words with them, so she would give them two choices: either hand over the professor and leave alive, or stay and fight to the death while experiencing her true power. Ying prepared to attack her, questioning who she thought she was to make such a ridiculous demand. The other presidents took the chance to attack at the same time, but in the blink of an eye, they were completely defeated. The chief of the Beyond Academy and the chief of the Stainless Steel Academy were defeated instantly. They asked what had just happened because they had not seen anything. Other soldiers appeared and were frightened, but did not hesitate to attack. However, their weapons had no effect on her body, not even her eye being damaged by the gunfire. Her subordinate kept smiling, saying that human technology was only mediocre, and began destroying everything in front of her. Meanwhile, underground, Four Eyes, who was helping the professor walk, asked why the bomb had not exploded since everyone had said that if someone approached, it would detonate. The professor explained that nothing had a perfect system, and that when a system was turned off, there was a 2-second window before the sensors came back online. Four Eyes, still frightened by the professor's ambition, pointed out that the zombie king was already very strong, and questioned whether they really intended to make him even stronger, warning that if they continued like this, they would face huge problems. The professor replied that there was no better vassal than him, but as soon as they reached the outside, the zombie king noticed that everyone had already been defeated. Four Eyes and the professor were also shocked and asked what had happened. The queen appeared and told the professor that someone who could not touch even a single hair on the protagonist's body after he entered the second phase was not suitable to be a vassal. The two were stunned, and the zombie king felt humiliated. The queen offered for him to use her body for his new experiments. The zombie king looked at her and laughed, asking if she was really saying she was stronger than him. She confirmed it and added that the difference between them was enormous, and if he did not believe it, he could test it. The fake zombie king tried to attack her, but she dodged and punched him in the face, shocking everyone. The punch was so powerful that it destroyed all the walls in its path. The fake zombie king, with a trembling voice and completely furious, said that the attack was as strong as the protagonist and asked how that was possible. Realizing there was no way to deal with that woman, he prepared himself and tried to attack the bomb, shouting that they would all be eliminated together. The professor tried to stop him, warning that it was nuclear. Four Eyes said he already knew that man was not trustworthy, but before the explosion could consume the place, the queen used her abilities to compress the bomb and reverse the situation. The bomb that had been exploding returned to normal and stabilized. Shortly afterward, it fell onto the fake zombie king, pinning him to the ground. She could not understand how such an insignificant being with such a ridiculous amount of strength dared to call himself a king. Using her powers, she pulled him up and held him by the neck, asking how the protagonist had defeated him. He refused to say, but realized that the effect of her gaze was the same as the protagonist's. Terrified, he began screaming that both of them were monsters from the past civilization. Once again corrupted and destroyed by fear and panic, he lost consciousness. The queen told him to learn his place, and in that way, the pitiful zombie king who had been resurrected, only to be eliminated again by the Blood Queen, lay lifeless on the ground. Everyone present could not believe how easily she had defeated him. She looked again at the professor, who asked if she was good enough to become a vassal. And once again, with ambition consuming his body and mind, he smiled and said that the answer was obvious. In the protagonist's city, Violet wanted to speak with him because she had something very important to discuss. Agu tried to stop her, saying it was not a good time to talk to the king. However, she said it was an emergency and that she had no other choice, so she had to be taken to the king. He kept refusing, saying it could be dangerous. She asked why it would be dangerous and ignored all the warnings. She opened the door and said she had urgent bad news. But the moment the protagonist looked at her, she became startled and asked since when he spoke and acted like that. Zombie kept smiling and asked if she did not think it was more interesting to change things once in a while, then asked why she was looking for him. The president explained that the professor had just escaped. The protagonist calmly replied that he already knew, because that bunch of trash could never dream of stopping Little Red. Violet was shocked and asked how he knew since it had only happened 10 minutes ago. The protagonist explained that Little Red used the power of her bloodline, so naturally he could feel it. Violet was surprised to hear about the bloodline power and shouted that she needed to report it to her superior. But the protagonist hugged her and said that now that she was there, she did not need to hurry away, since he had not been able to mingle peacefully with humans for a long time. He asked why they did not stay and eat something while he showed her around the city. She was startled and slapped his hand away, telling him not to try anything funny and asking why he wanted to show her the city when she had already heard what he did to the inspector. She added that she did not have time to waste because it was an emergency she needed to handle. As she was leaving the room, the protagonist called out and asked whether she was not interested in how he used his own bloodline power. That sparked her curiosity, and she asked if he also had that power. Zombie simply smiled at her. She sensed the pressure and the emptiness in his gaze and said that if that was the case, she would accept a date. Meanwhile, at the medical center, doctors were desperately trying to revive someone. One doctor said that the chief of the Beyond Academy was still breathing. With a weak and trembling voice, he tried to speak to a doctor who approached and asked what he wanted to say. The chief asked them to call the head of the department. Meanwhile, in one of the professor's laboratories, the queen was waiting while the professor stared in amazement, saying that it was the first time he had seen such a perfect body, something completely beyond science. Lanling interrupted them and asked whether they were conducting some random experiment and whether the protagonist's genes could really be used to enhance the queen. He said they should not do anything that might harm her. Four Eyes told him to relax, since the professor's experiments and research were at the very top among all humans. The professor said there had already been a successful case before, but they had all been improved thanks to Zombie. Furthermore, the queen was not human, so he saw no problem. And now they only needed the protagonist's genes. Everyone was shocked and asked whether the professor really expected them to go to Zombie and pull out a strand of his hair. But the professor said he was not stupid enough to send them to their deaths. The queen's subordinate asked how they would obtain the protagonist's genes, since he would never give them as a gift. Four Eyes began laughing and showed a vial, saying that something so simple would not stop the light. Everyone was surprised and asked how they had gotten that. The professor explained that there was a human woman who had obtained the protagonist's genes, and to confirm whether she had truly turned into a zombie, she had been subjected to a full body examination. As soon as he learned of this, he asked one of his collaborators to collect a vial of her blood. Four Eyes added that having spies among the enemy was always useful, and now it was time to begin. Meanwhile, early that evening during the meeting between the protagonist and the president, she came to understand a little about the situation, and said that his power truly did not match his name. However, she had a doubt and asked what would happen if she could not return, and whether there were any side effects. The protagonist simply stayed silent and stared at her. The president told him to say something, but suddenly he returned to his original form. Annoyed, she began scolding him, asking whether he could not finish speaking before changing back, saying that she had given up something very important to go on a date with him, and that he could not just change his face and pretend he knew nothing, because he had to take responsibility. She kept shouting and demanded that he change back, but the protagonist said he did not want to, and pointed out that he had not forced her to go on a date since she had agreed willingly. Violet asked the chef where the peppers were because she wanted a kilogram, but he explained that all the peppers in the city had been confiscated by the head of the department, Blackie. 2 months later, Lonky said that it was the second time she had gone to the hospital to see her chief. He said that he had asked her to send the message before losing consciousness and asked whether she had done it. She told him to relax and explained that she had used the satellites to send the message as quickly as possible about what had happened, even classifying it as a red-level emergency. However, she was furious about the situation, saying they were all truly useless because there had been so many guards and presidents, and even an active nuclear core. Yet they had all been defeated and destroyed by a single woman. The chief explained that the opponent this time was completely different and that the core had obviously been activated, but that woman had somehow suppressed it and returned it to its normal state. Furthermore, he added that she was clearly not someone from their era. Lanky said she already knew that and confirmed that she had already sent the message to the head of the department, who was probably already aware of what had happened. In a completely remote place, someone remarked that they had never imagined there could be a city buried beneath the ground there. Moreover, the technological advancement there was far from low, which meant it was a pity that it had been destroyed. One of the agents received the message and said he understood, then called the head of the department, saying it was an emergency, but the head of the department was focused on something else. One of his subordinates approached him again and repeated that there was an emergency, explaining that the professor who had recently been captured had just escaped. The subordinates were stunned and asked if it was really what they thought. The head of the department said yes and explained that what they were seeing were the remains of a person from ancient times. He added that the body had more than 134 fractures, as if it had been broken by some kind of monster. However, what was truly frightening was that the remains had been burned to the limit, which explained why the body had not rotted even after hundreds of years, since it was basically an empty shell and had no research value. One subordinate looked around and said that there seemed to be traces of a huge battle there, but he could not believe how a place with such advanced technology had been damaged like that and wondered what kind of monster could have done it. The head of the department said there was nothing else for them to find there and asked what this emergency was about. His subordinate explained that the Beyond Academy had recently recruited a new president who captured the professor, but for some reason, the professor had managed to escape again, and many presidents had been injured in the process. Right now, the headquarters was in a state of emergency and their available combat power was insufficient. As the situation was being explained, one of the subordinates noticed something on the ground and began examining it, asking what it was. A sound echoed through the place and an illusion appeared before them. The subordinates could not believe that such technology was still functioning even after millennia of degradation. The projection said that it was the first time he had seen a human with that kind of physical strength. One of the subordinates warned the head of the department to be careful, but he asked why they were panicking when it was only a projection. The projection said it could make him more powerful if he swore an oath of life to protect human civilization. The head of the department said that was natural and there was no need to insist on it because he only wanted to understand the ancient humans better. He asked how they had been annihilated in such a way. The projection displayed a picture of the protagonist and said that he was responsible for destroying everything that was alive at that time. 1,000 years ago, the world was not like it was now, with only 2 great continents. Back then, the Earth was divided into 7 great continents and 8 great oceans. There were around 100 countries, and humanity was glorious. In order to increase humanity's power, they gathered all their resources, and many of them discovered the technology needed to build spacecraft. Their technological level reached an unprecedented height, and they were even able to fight aliens. But even their advanced technology was nothing before that existence, and the monsters hidden deep within the Earth were not even worth mentioning. Despite all that power and glory, there was still one absolute existence. That zombie was the only one they could never defeat. A subordinate asked why they could not defeat him. The projection said that it was all because of the protagonist. One subordinate asked the head of the department if the projection might be trying to deceive them, since that man did not look strong at all. The head replied that the ancient people would not joke about something like that, and apparently his subordinate could not even imagine the real reason why humanity had been fighting zombies since birth. The subordinate said the reason they built so many academies to resist zombies was simply because they were constantly being suppressed, since they could never eradicate them completely for some unexplained reason, which made him wonder if that unexplained reason was that man. The head of the department asked the ancient projection how they should deal with such a terrifying monster. The ancient one said his time was limited because he was merely a shadow of the past that had survived by placing his memories into an AI. He explained that in the past they had focused only on improving technology, but the head of the department had walked a different path because he had never imagined that a human physical body could reach such a level, which gave him hope. He said that with the head of the department's physical body combined with their technology, they had a small chance of defeating him. One of the doors opened and the technology was revealed. The head of the department asked if that was ancient technology. The ancient one told him to always remember that no matter what race appeared on Earth, zombies were humanity's greatest enemy. The head of the department told his subordinate to take the gauntlet and thanked the ancient one, promising they would not disappoint him. After taking the gauntlet, he gathered everyone and said it was time to leave because the rest of the equipment there was useless. One subordinate asked whether they would search for the man shown on the screen, but the head said it was not the right time since they had to deal with the professor first. The world was too big, and finding a single zombie would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Violet received a call and told the protagonist that the head of the department was returning and had asked everyone to gather, adding that the protagonist should also go. He was surprised and asked who this head of the department was. Sometime later, the professor was about to reach his objective and suddenly began smiling, saying he had finally succeeded. Landling, holding a coin in his hand, lamented that the entire tribe only had 1 coin left and that with the Blood Tribe ruler, they could not feed everyone even if he worked 10 different jobs a day. Even the coin he obtained by begging was not enough. With a sad look, he said he did not want to be eliminated. His companion told him not to be depressed and asked whether he had forgotten who they were because they had abilities and were very strong, so they could do some side jobs. Lanling asked him not to joke and wondered what kind of job they could do. His friend said they could rob a bank, since on the way there he had seen one and everyone inside was slow and clumsy like slugs, taking 30 minutes just to withdraw money. It was the first time he had seen such an inefficient bank. With their abilities, they could solve the entire problem in 10 seconds. As long as they were fast enough, not even rockets could catch them because once they grabbed the money, they just had to run. And with their speed, they would be safe. Lanling became excited about the plan and agreed that it made sense. At the provincial headquarters, one of the soldiers approached the head of the department and explained that all the presidents had gathered and they could begin the meeting. The head put on his mask and said it was time to begin. Meanwhile, in front of the bank, Lanling was observing the place and commented that they were indeed very slow. He got into a car and asked how the preparations were going because they could not afford any incident. His subordinate told him not to worry since they had observed the location, and there was only a small group of people there, and when it came to robbing banks, they were professionals. Inside the bank, Blackie was reviewing the financial report for February. Lanling and his companions prepared to enter the bank, but they had chosen the Zombie People's Bank. A soldier delivered a report saying all the calculations were finished, and the current assets totaled $435.5 billion. Blackie ordered them to review all the accounts again, saying they could not make mistakes because as subordinates of His Majesty, they could not afford even a single error with the city's finances. The soldiers obeyed and began checking everything again. Meanwhile, the group entered the bank and told everyone not to move because it would be better for everyone that way. They began laughing and grabbing the money, saying they were rich. Blackie noticed smoke coming from somewhere and asked what was going on. Lanling laughed and said that finally they would never have to beg or live in poverty again. One of the agents approached Blackie with bad news, explaining that someone had just robbed one of the banks. He panicked. As they were fleeing in the car, Lanling excitedly held the money, saying they finally had a good life ahead of them, but he heard a strange voice calling him. He looked back asking who was calling, but quickly recognized that feeling. He began trembling in fear and grabbed one of his subordinates, asking the name of the bank they had robbed. The subordinate said he did not know because he could not read, but another said it was the Zombie People's Bank. Lanling became even more terrified and looked back, realizing death was approaching. Blackie prepared to attack, frightening them all. Lanling shouted for them to accelerate as fast as possible, explaining that the man chasing them was the most mysterious subordinate the protagonist had obtained around the year 800 after Christ. Blackie approached and said he did not care what they or the queen were thinking, but if they wanted to live, they had better return all the money. He punched the top of a building, causing such a tremor that all the cars around began to float. Lanling said that was not fair and asked if he was not being excessive. The driver said the money they had stolen would not even be enough to pay for the car repairs. Another person looked out the window and said it was over because he had completely lost his mind. Lanling shouted for his subordinates to split up and immediately returned to warn the queen that they had caused trouble, saying he would stay behind to buy time. He climbed onto the car and said their role was that of guardians, so he wanted to see how strong the protagonist's guardian was. Blackie replied that no one was authorized to leave. He advanced and struck Lanling directly, asking whether he truly thought they were on the same level because he was not qualified. With that single punch, Lanling was thrown kilometers away and the money was recovered. Meanwhile, at the district headquarters, everyone had gathered. As soon as the head of the department entered, everyone greeted him. He said he had just received the message about the professor's escape, but before that, he had an important matter to announce. He showed them the gauntlet and people asked what it was. The head explained that it was a piece of ancient technology, astonishing everyone. He continued explaining that he had found it in the deepest part of the canyon, and when he learned all the useful information about the ancient civilization, he was completely shocked. Ying became excited, saying that with ancient technology, the professor and that crazy, perverted woman would no longer even be worth mentioning. However, the head said they would not use it against the professor because it was reserved for something much bigger. According to the description left by the ancient projection, there was a terrifying monster living on Earth, and the ancient civilization had been annihilated by that same monster. People began to worry, and Violet asked whether he was joking and whether he was really saying that such a monster existed on Earth. The head confirmed it, and the protagonist stepped closer to look at the gauntlet while the head explained that the ancient people emphasized they must treat that monster as an extremely high-level threat. It was a monster that had destroyed an entire civilization, so they had to be extremely careful. The president asked whether such a monster really existed and where it could be. The head replied that he did not know because the ancient people had not said much. It could be anywhere now, so they had to remain vigilant. The protagonist asked how he intended to use that thing. The head said that even though the ancient people had not explained it, they could deduce its use simply by looking, and he had already figured it out. He only needed to put it on his hand and press the button in the middle. He resumed explaining that they had to find that monster and eliminate it as soon as possible. But suddenly, he looked to the side in shock. The head tried to grab the gauntlet and everyone asked what was happening. Lanling, who had been thrown by the protagonist's subordinate, crashed into the tower and caused a tremor. The head of the department managed to grab the gauntlet and the president asked what was going on. Lanling was unconscious, and Blackie walked over and stared at him. Lanling begged his queen for help. Everyone remained confused, asking what was happening and who that man was since they had never seen him before. Violet was stunned and wondered whether he was one of the protagonist's subordinates. Zombie asked what his subordinate was doing there. One of the head's subordinates warned that the other party was a zombie. The presidents rushed forward to restrain him. Ying said that Zombie was extremely arrogant and asked whether he knew where he was. But Blackie, furious, shouted that it was none of their business and defeated everyone with ease. The presidents asked what the hell that was and why they were being defeated so easily, saying that whether they were presidents or not, they were always treated like cannon fodder. Dawn was also shocked, saying that Man was on another level compared to the one with the chainsaw. Blackie, extremely angry for almost losing his king's money, prepared for the final attack, declaring that they would all be eliminated right there. Everyone was terrified, but the protagonist stepped forward and punched him in the chest, releasing a frightening pressure across the area. One subordinate told the head of that department that the new president's strength was terrifying. He replied that he already knew, and that compared to him, the strength of ordinary presidents was like that of an ant. That meant the ancient people had been right and that the protagonist was even more powerful than he had imagined. Blackie realized that his king was standing before him and knelt down, asking what the protagonist was doing there. Zombie said that his subordinate could not eliminate them. Meanwhile, the head of the department put on the gauntlet to fight the protagonist. Zombie explained that this was their headquarters, and that these were the people who had given them the city. Suddenly, in the middle of the conversation, something resembling an apocalypse began happening, leaving everyone confused. The Blood Queen had arrived. Violet asked who that woman was, and the other president said she was responsible for the attack. The queen stared with a different expression and shouted that she was now invincible. As soon as she saw Lanling begging for help, she ordered her subordinates to eliminate everyone and rescue him immediately. But the head of the apartment stepped in and stopped them, throwing them far away. The queen simply watched, while the head warned that things were about to get out of control and ordered his subordinates to evacuate the entire city and leave the rest to him. The queen told the human to mind his own business. The head advanced and punched her in the face, angering her and prompting a counterattack. The presidents could not understand how that woman could be so strong. Blackie told the protagonist that they had already started fighting, but the protagonist replied that it was not their problem. The leader of the department goes outside and says to the queen that her opponent will be him. She simply says that he is being very audacious. The department chief says that he needs to finish that with a single blow, and she agrees, emphasizing that this was exactly what she intended to do. The two prepare themselves and rush forward to end that fight, and the impact of their two strikes creates enormous pressure all around them. But the gauntlet is completely destroyed, and the leader of the department is thrown very far away. He becomes irritated, saying that ancient technology is complete trash, and that if he had known that, he would have fought with his own strength. However, the queen praises him, saying that he is the human with the most powerful body she has encountered in the last several hundred years, and that, if it had been 1,000 years ago, that piece of technology might have made their battle uncertain. But it is a pity, because now she will have to lay him to rest in peace. But before she can say goodnight to him, Vermint charges in from behind, forcing her to retreat with a devastating strike. The president tells the queen that apparently she picked the wrong opponent. The queen, a little confused, asks what is going on there, but Violet says that now she will handle the fight from that point on. However, her mood, her eyes, and even her aura are completely different from normal. Lanki becomes frightened and asks what happened to her friend. Even the queen is surprised. The young girl who serves the queen was trying to help her companion, but Dawn attacks her, throwing her against one of the buildings. The small subordinate asks who she is, but the queen realizes that she is not normal either. The leader of the department had no strength left to fight, and the other presidents could not believe what they were seeing. The little subordinate shouts at Dawn, telling her not to underestimate her, breaks free and backs away, emphasizing that she is not a small fish and should not be treated like one. But Dawn only keeps laughing, telling the girl to prove her strength. The young girl rushes forward but receives a direct hit, and Dawn asks if that really is the best she can offer. And once again being controlled by her split personality, she gets excited by the fight and keeps attacking. The presidents are also shocked and ask when it was that she became so strong like that. The girl, feeling a little pressured, makes some impressive moves and uses blood clones. But Dawn is not easily impressed and manages to strike the real one with ease, making the other clones disappear. Since the name of that subordinate is unknown, she will be called the Blood Princess. The Blood Princess, after taking a strong blow to the stomach, asks if that girl is really human, Meanwhile, the queen uses a slashing ability, but the president manages to defend herself easily. However, the slash hits the city behind them, causing great destruction. The presidents who were inside say that that force is far too excessive and ask whether Violet had always been that strong. The chief of the academy from beyond says no and emphasizes that he already said that something cannot be right, asking why her condition reminds him of something. The queen finally understands the situation and says that her new opponent is someone who has already been enhanced before. However, Violet is not the target she is looking for. She emphasizes that she is looking for the protagonist so that she can avenge the humiliation she suffered in the past. She closes her eyes and concentrates, and when she opens them, her presence is overwhelming. With a murderous aura, she emphasizes that she endured that for hundreds of years until reaching that moment, and now she can easily punish anyone who stands in her way. So since humans are not her target, she asks Violet to simply get out of her way. The president agrees, saying that the queen is right and emphasizes that her current strength cannot compare. And even if she uses stimulants, she will not be able to win. However, if everything the queen has is what she is showing now in order to defeat the true king, then she needs to rethink her assumptions because that will not be enough. Violet begins to laugh and says that she wants to show something very funny. The queen asks what she is talking about, and Violet says that it is her second form. With a smile on her face, her skin begins to peel away, and the presidents become even more frightened, asking what she is doing now. The energy that begins to be released is so immense that even the queen is impressed. The atmospheric pressure changes, causing intense pressure all around them. A few seconds later, the second transformation is complete, and the chief of the academy shouts in shock, saying that that cannot be true. Even the queen and the protagonist are impressed. Dawn also becomes excited when she sees that her superior can change forms. The Blood Queen cannot believe that such a thing exists because history is repeating itself once again. She believes that now they will also have a queen of the zombies. Violet asks her opponent if she is managing to contemplate life and whether by any chance the two of them share the same feeling that there is no need for useless words between them. The Blood Queen uses her own blood to create a sword and tries to attack, saying that Violet is right, because only the weak keep using words. The president takes her own sword and cuts her hand, staining the blade with her own blood, saying that this is the improved blade. And with a precise and extremely powerful movement, she uses the Red Blade Rift ability, cutting the Blood Queen in half. The speed and precision of her slash were so great that she used the blood cells, pulverizing her opponent in a single blow. The subordinates of the leader of the department use their technologies and report the results, saying that apparently President Violet delivered an attack so devastating that she pulverized every cell in that woman's body. The chief of the academy asks what kind of tasteless joke that is, and Lanki realizes the abyss that lies before her. But Violet looks behind her and says that she knows very well that that woman is not so fragile and asks if she really thinks she can hide. Suddenly, the cells of the body begin to reconstruct and the queen's body remakes itself completely. The presidents become even more frightened by that, asking if the two of them are still human. The protagonist realizes that the red one is almost getting serious, so he wants to change places to watch the fight a little better. The president warns that the protagonist had told her that the red one is an old undead monster from hundreds of years ago, so that is why she cannot be judged with normal logic. The head of the department shouts when he hears that she is an undead from hundreds of years ago. Lanki argues with the protagonist for having given all the information to only one person, but he says that that is a very dangerous place and that they should leave as well. The two of them stare at each other for a while, and the queen, already irritated by the situation, begins to fight seriously, saying that they still have not finished the fight. But Violet had been waiting for that moment. Far away from that place, the protagonist keeps watching, saying that now they should be safe, but Lanki had gone over to him. Meanwhile, the two begin to fight, their blows so devastating that buildings are being cut as if they were pieces of paper. Violet takes a hit and, irritated, attacks with all her strength, terrifying everyone. Even the protagonist is impressed because she cut the city in half. People say that that cannot be real and that they must be dreaming. Meanwhile, a department chief was still struggling with the gauntlet, trying to remove it from his hand. The two continue fighting, and the queen asks what difference it makes if her opponent has a second form, because that still is not enough to defeat her. She gains a small advantage and throws Violet against the wall, and right after that she throws her sword, pinning it into the building. Lanki becomes worried since the president was not reacting. The leader of the department was moving the gauntlet very quickly, asking what was wrong with that thing. But suddenly something begins to appear and a strange voice tells him that it is going to borrow his body. Frightened, he asks whose voice that is and emphasizes that it is impossible for that ancient person to have entered his body. Violet grabs the sword and says that unfortunately the queen is right because she still cannot injure her, but in that regard they are even, because she also cannot be eliminated. Lanki becomes jealous and begins to shake the protagonist, shouting that she wants that too, and telling him to do the same thing he did with her. because she is sure that it was he who gave that power to the president. But the protagonist refuses, saying that it could be very violent. Suddenly, another source of energy begins to appear, drawing the attention of the three of them. The presidents ask what that sound was, and something colossal begins to appear in the sky, saying that it has finally been revived. That incredibly huge titan begins to move in the middle of planet Earth, and the people who had been living their normal lives become terrified. Things begin to be destroyed, but the protagonist moves quickly, saving the people around him. The titan finally gets what it wanted, and the two women are forced to retreat. After being revived, the titan begins to laugh, but the leader of the department was still trying to stay alive and asks what the elder is trying to do. The elder apologizes and explains that he needed to deceive him because he must serve as a sacrifice for the good of humanity. The presidents who remained below ask what that thing could possibly be, but when they look to the right, they realize that the protagonist was holding the titan's hand. The two of them try to attack the titan, but it defends itself, telling them to get away because it has nothing against the two of them. Both of them are easily captured, and the titan tells them to stop acting like ordinary humans, because he had already studied the genes of zombies for centuries, and even so, they only use that to obtain stimulants and attack him, which is nothing more than something superficial. The protagonist, who is trying to restrain himself, begins to lose control and his first form takes over, laughing. With only the first form, he manages to twist the titan's entire arm and quickly begins to move. An elder emphasizes that he waited for a millennium, but the day has finally arrived. The protagonist was pushing the titan, telling it to get out of his way. The elder shouts, saying that the time for revenge has finally come, and asks what he is waiting for, telling him to assume his true form at once. And the protagonist answers that call. After assuming the third form, he pushes the titan's hand away with ease, surprising the Blood Queen. The elder says that the protagonist is underestimating him because he is nothing but a cursed monster. Lanki asks what is happening there, but the fight between them continues and several robots begin to be released. The two chiefs ask how the technology of the ancient people can be that strong because it makes them look like cavemen. However, that was nothing compared to the protagonist's strength, who was destroying all the technology around him with extreme ease. The elder shouts that it is not over yet, but the protagonist keeps advancing as if there were nothing that could stop him. The elder, who had already known the protagonist's real power, asks why he is not using his full power and whether it is because he is in fact being underestimated. The elder creates other completely colossal titans in the middle of Earth. The elder emphasizes that on the last night before the end of everything, he can personally witness that that is not the protagonist's true form. He uses the titans to attack him, but each movement of the titans was so devastating that it dragged cars and buildings along with it. With only one blow, he throws the protagonist to the moon, but that does not cause a single scratch on his body. The leader of the department, who is still trying to keep his consciousness, tells the elder to pay attention to the destruction he is causing and asks if he really needs to go that far in order to fight the protagonist. But the elder scolds him, telling him to shut up, and emphasizes that the protagonist needs to be eliminated at any cost. One of the titans goes to the moon to finish the job. However, Zombie keeps dodging the attacks while the elder says that that being must be eliminated no matter what price must be paid. But with only one blow, he brings down one of the titans. The leader of the department says that he saw the reports and that after the protagonist became president of a city, he was not cruel at all. Unlike what the elder had said, the city under his care is simply a good city like any other. Not only did it generate tax revenue for them, but it also helped humanity develop even more. He never harmed any human. Quite the opposite. He helped humans many times. So why can they not coexist? The elder tells him to remain silent and asks if he really believes that they do not want to live in peace. But the elder tells him to look at the protagonist and notices that he is smiling. Then he asks whether he really looks like someone with whom they can peacefully coexist, because zombies were supposed to be only an insignificant race. A random missile could eliminate all zombies, but one day, that cursed being appeared from somewhere no one even knows. And now the fate of all human civilization depends on his mood. If he loses control for even a single second, he can destroy the planet completely. So that kind of entity does not have permission to exist. Since he is not one of them, that means he needs to be erased from existence. The elder analyzes all of his energy and activates divine punishment. Several titans appear, driving their swords into the moon, trying to imprison the protagonist. However, that only makes him increasingly angry and his control is gradually disappearing. In a serious tone, he says the word strength and emphasizes that just because the titans are large does not mean they have more of it. With a single snap of his fingers, he completely destroys all of the titans, and even Earth, which was far away since he was on the moon, suffers the collateral effects of that snap. Lanki shouts that that is very dangerous and that they need to bring all civilians to the evacuation center. The protagonist charges at the elder and throws him back to Earth, and with his own hands begins to tear open the ground. Meanwhile, all the presidents shout for everyone to spread out, and the people who are more prepared need to help those who cannot move on their own. While running, Lanki notices that the ground at her side is cracking, and when she looks back, sees that the protagonist is splitting the world in half with his own hands. She screams for him not to do that again, while the presidents say that that is a magnitude 20 earthquake. However, all that was happening was that the protagonist's self-control was gradually disappearing, and his absolute strength was destroying everything around him. He split a continent in half with the strength of his arms alone, but that was not stopping. The crack was crossing the entire world, as if it were being split in two. Ying asks how it is possible for such strength to come from some form of life. He holds Ying, trying to help her, but when she looks to the side, she sees what was really happening. The protagonist was beating the elder, and with a single punch, he sends him flying several kilometers away. Almost losing consciousness, the elder begins to laugh and asks the leader of the department if now he is managing to see, because that is the protagonist's true destructive power. Just by releasing his strength, the sea began to create gigantic tsunamis, and absolutely everything in the world was collapsing. Zombie had finally reached his true form, and the leader of the department asks what kind of creature that is. Violet senses something strange, and the queen begins to tremble with fear, saying that she has never seen that form before and asking if that's the same guy as before. The elder keeps laughing, saying that it really is that form. That is the exact face he saw before everything was destroyed. They prepare to continue the attack, but the protagonist does not show any kind of expression. Blackie becomes frightened and asks whether his king has lost his mind. He tries to run as fast as he can, saying that the elder will definitely be dead and that he needs to get out of there if he does not want to be destroyed along with him. The elder begins to channel even more strength while laughing, saying that he can finally see that form after so much time. He apologizes to the head of the department, saying that his body may suffer a little. The chief of the department still tries to stop him, telling the elder to stop. However, the protagonist's strength is something beyond any kind of entity present at that moment. Just by raising his hand, the elder's armor begins to fall apart, and as soon as he closes his hand, the elder's body begins to twist, creating a powerful explosion that reaches even the sky. That was enough to completely shatter the elder's body, who refuses to lose while asking why, even after becoming so strong, he is still incapable of winning. The elder's body was destroyed, and the body of the leader of the department returns to its form, but with a hole in the middle. The presidents ask whether the leader of the department was really eliminated. Blackie tries to communicate telepathically with his king, saying that they cannot be the ones who eliminate the leaders of the humans. However, the protagonist was acting like a true divinity, and by snapping his fingers once again, he manages to defy death, bringing life back to the body of the leader of the department, reconstructing his DNA and regenerating his body completely. While floating in the sky, his organs, heart, and everything else begin to return. The Blood Queen cannot understand how one person can have that amount of power. Not even Violet could believe what she was seeing. The leader of the department, after having his body regenerated, regains consciousness and asks whether he is really alive. He realizes that the protagonist was beside him, but he could not say anything. And it was at that moment that the head of the human department finally understood why the ancient people had made such a great effort to get rid of the protagonist. All of that was caused by fear of an entity that is beyond life and death. None of the presidents who were watching that could believe what had just happened before their very eyes. Violet, still frightened by what the protagonist might do, runs to him, screaming his name, but as soon as she gets close, he had already returned to his normal form and asks whether she can now use the power of the bloodline. She also returns to her normal form, saying that thanks to him, she achieved that power. However, she would really like to know why he decided to destroy everyone's home and almost end the world, when he could have simply eliminated the elder with a single strike, just as he did a few minutes earlier. The protagonist apologizes and emphasizes that he did not want to frighten the humans, because if he destroyed that power of the elders with a single movement, it would create panic once again. The Blood Queen realizes that no matter what she does, she will never be capable of reaching even 1% of the strength needed to equal the protagonist. That event caused the southern continent to shift by 130 kilometers. That completely changed Earth's climate and created an even deeper valley. 2 months later, since the humans managed to evacuate in time, there were not so many losses. Zombie architecture firm was solely responsible for rebuilding the many provinces that had been destroyed. After discovering why the ancient people insisted on eliminating Zombie after facing that frightening and absolute kind of power firsthand, the head of the human department needed to decide what he would do next. Inspector Chen enters his room and asks if he had called for her. He answers yes and tells her to go buy some trays of high-quality eggs because he is going to visit the new chief of City H. Meanwhile, somewhere else, in the Blood Tribe in the new city under construction, Landling was acting like an evil boss, telling the zombies that he spent a lot of money to hire them and that he did not want to see them slacking off. The Blood Princess goes to him and asks where he got so much money. Some people were asking Blackie whether those guys were not mortal enemies. So why did he approve giving them a loan? Blackie emphasizes that the king had said they should not fight, otherwise they would keep going to the bank to get money. So why not just lend them the money with a high interest rate of 20%? In return, they can pay that back by working for them. With that kind of interest rate, they will need to work for the next 300 years to pay everything off. And his companions think that he really has a very dark heart. Lanling asks where the queen is, but the princess says that she does not know because she is probably still in her room. The Blood Queen never imagined that the protagonist could have an even more powerful form. She had not thought about that in the past. With the stimulants, Zombie had only used a small portion of his power to face her. Seeing his new form eliminate the human elder like a god, the Blood Queen, who had always pursued power to defeat him, finally understands that she would never be able to finish him. While everything seemed to be going perfectly well, Four Eyes and the professor managed to find the place where the elder had been. He looks at the elder's body and tells the protagonist that even if it costs him his life, he will not give up. The protagonist's alarm clock begins to make noise and gently he turns it off. Well, that is Zombie. Zom from Zombie and B from Zombie. He does not know his age because when he died, he is not sure either. He only remembers that it was on a summer day. When he was still studying at school, he was turned into a zombie. At first, he was just a normal zombie, the same ones that you see as monsters, following orders no matter where he went. But in order to survive, so as not to be turned into fuel and not to be a machine of perfect movement, he began to train and decided not to eat human meat anymore, starting to consume only protein powder in all 3 meals of the day, until he finally managed to succeed and become invincible with his 4 transformations. However, he grew tired of fighting to achieve peace and began to help humans. Through his efforts, he solved countless problems for humanity. Whether it was the Zombie King or the ancient people, he kept helping to change everyone's view of zombies until he finally had his own city. But perhaps he became a little too strong, and because of that, the humans who fear his strength try to get rid of him. At least that was what he discovered the day before. The doorbell rings, and as soon as he answers, Violet scolds him, asking what he is doing because, being the leader, he cannot be so careless. She emphasizes that he is 2 hours late. The protagonist slams the door in her face and says that he will be ready in a moment. Since it is the beginning of a new year, the province organized an academy growth evaluation. Lanki, who is conducting the presentation, says that they all went through turbulent times that led them to many problems and challenges, but that from that moment on, Zombie will lead the academy toward prosperity. Therefore, everyone needs to welcome the new head of the academy. Everyone present shouts, wishing him good health and good luck. A little embarrassed, the protagonist laughs, wishes everyone a good morning, and says that they must be hungry, which is why he brought some eggs for everyone. And that was how he replaced the previous chief, becoming the new head of the academy. One of the people comments about the former chief, saying that he was set aside, but the former chief of the academy tells him to be quiet because there is no way to beat that guy in a fight. Sitting at the table drinking his coffee, the leader of the human department was calm, but the inspector was shouting at one of her subordinates, telling him to get out because there was an emergency. Her subordinate asks what the problem is and why she is in such a panic. Stammering and trembling with fear, she says that they are in huge trouble because the president is calling. He answers the phone and says that he will deliver his report immediately and apologizes, saying that the previous situation was very urgent and he did not have time to report anything. But now he swears that he is not trying to hide anything and that because of that, he will carry out the president's orders immediately. As soon as he hangs up, the inspector asks what the situation is. The chief explains that the whole world knows about the incident involving the ancient people. Still frightened, she asks how that is possible because they did not tell anyone. But a creature of that size did not need to be announced because it would hardly go unnoticed. The department chief asks how she thinks that would not be possible and explains that with the great commotion that caused, even the other side of the world would know that something was happening there. She says that, according to the news reported in the north, the southern continent had a great battle. The suspicion is that it was caused by ancient humans. The chief of the department emphasizes that this is still not over because the exchange meeting is about to begin. He complains because there are too many events happening at the same time. He asks her where the eggs are that he had told her to buy. She picks up the 2 bags and hands them to him. Sometime later at the protagonist's house in City H, the chief of the department thinks that since he allowed the protagonist to become the new chief, there probably should not be any problem in asking him to do that job. As soon as he rings the bell, Violet opens the door wearing somewhat different clothes, surprising him, and he asks what clothes those are. She also gets frightened, saying that it is just a misunderstanding. But suddenly, Lanki also appears wearing somewhat extravagant clothes, asking the leader of the department what he is doing there. Envious, he asks why the 2 of them are there, because even if the protagonist had been promoted, how dare they mock him, saying that he is going to report that to his superiors. How can they be so wild like that? Lanki realizes that something had been misunderstood, and the leader of the department turns his back, saying that he just remembered that he needs to do something and that he will return to headquarters. They shout, saying that it is a misunderstanding because they are only celebrating that bastard's promotion, and the reason they are dressed in those clothes is because they lost in the games. But he does not believe them and asks how it is possible for them to dress like that for a party, because he has never seen either of them wearing something like that. Violet, embarrassed, says that if he really does not believe them, then he can come in and take a look. Dawn was also wearing clothes like that, and the former head of the academy was trying as hard as possible to defeat the protagonist. Ying announces that whoever is not present will be fired. The leader of the department keeps looking at that and notices some food being tossed into the air and sliced by the chief of the Stainless Steel Academy. He celebrates, saying that the sushi is finally ready. But as soon as he looks at the door, he realizes that the leader of the department is staring at him and, frightened, shouts that that is not what he is thinking, because he only did what the protagonist forced him to do. However, the chief says that it is a good thing everyone is there, because that will save him the work of searching for each of them, since he has a very important announcement to make. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.